Topic one. Trans individuals and their issues are now part of the mainstream like never before. Most of that attention is currently very much negative, but the same could have been said for the gay community before same sex marriage was instituted. Is it better that trans individuals receive negative attention rather than none at all? Would the movement be better situated to change policy without this harsh scrutiny while trying to move a completely uninformed and uncaring political system? So yeah, this was actually inspired by our friend Mixvian Wolf. She had told me about the tragic situation in England right now with like the amount of turf hate that is coming out of there, and how difficult it is to be trans in this moment. And she mentioned how previously, right before this current era, when like people discovered that she was trans, or she talked about being trans, right? People just had a question mark, above their heads, like, okay, like, well, what's that about, And now it's an exclamation point, it's anger, like, oh, how dare you? You're uh, threatening the children, whatever, right? But so, is it better for the world to be at least uninformed and apathetic, or to be highly engaged with trans issues, even in a negative manner? So we'll start with Pixie. An introduction.
If I could, I'd like to pass to like someone who's trans to go first.
Okay, and whoever wants to raise their hand, then it's fine. Okay, Mia. More.
All right. First, yeah, I was gonna say two Neos here, so it's gonna be a bit difficult. First of all, I could definitely understand, especially with England being, at least in the trans community, we tend to call it Turf Island. A lot of bad news coming out of there. In terms of the notion that there's some validity to at least the bad things coming out, because say that it's like attacks on people on buses, things like that, that normally makes people a lot more sympathetic to the cause than it does make people detract from it. Now, I do know that I was reading something on the BBC where it was recently ruled lawful in the United Kingdom for people who are like people who self-ID as a different gender, or people who are trans, to be housed in the jail cells of their preferred gender. So that is at least a step forward from the previous way that they had it. But in general, I feel that, as bad as it is to say, it's like it sounds really, really morbid to say that bad things get sympathetic appreciation from society. But if that's the only way that we're going to have to make people realize that we are fundamentally human beings and that we deserve the same rights, then I guess that's the only route that we have to go, because at this point, legitimately nothing else has seemingly been able to convince people, if that makes sense.
Thanks so much. Saren? Saren, can you hear me? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Hi. Yeah, I was gonna say something pretty similarly. I mean, I think there's always been the negative attitudes and attention towards trans people and the LGBT community in general. But now there's just like a giant flashlight on it, and I also think it's just one way to open, like it's a bad way to open discussion, but it does open a discussion around LGBT people and transgender people.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. Let's go to. Well, we're going to go to everyone, so don't leave your hand. Femboy Mass.
Yeah, I agree with Neo's point. In the recent like last couple 5 or 6 years, trans acceptance has gone really high, right? To the point where world leaders literally have pronouns in bio, right? That's pretty crazy. So even though some of the attention on trans people is very negative, especially what we see in the UK, the attention has given us more legitimacy. There's also the fact that in these cases, there are two really good ways of cementing ourselves as people. One, through receiving violence, although it's pretty horrible. It does help, right? I remember, I could be wrong, but in the civil rights movement, a big part of it was allowing lots of these violent protests, violence as in like towards the protesters, to be televised so that people would feel more empathy towards the black rights movement. And I feel like that same principle can apply to trans people. There's also the fact that you being trans can help you humanize yourself to others, right? If you're in a weird red area, not many people know about trans people. They just see them as icky people, right? Them knowing someone who is trans will really help them accept that in the future. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Okay. Zonia?
Hey, so I think we've got a pretty common pattern of problems that occur where there's a subset of people who are underrepresented or not represented at all, and as issues arise with the group, and they start standing up to speak for themselves and asking for just basic representation and being treated as humans, there's going to be a backlash. And we're seeing that backlash right now, a pushback. And we saw it with the gay and lesbian movement, gay movement specifically with the 70s, that really dealt with a lot of pushback all the way up through the 90s. And the lesbian movement came around the same time as well, but didn't really get a lot as much attention until about the 80s. And there was a ton of pushback. So it's just something that we all experience as we go through these things where we're starting to say, hey, I'm here, right? As the old saying was, I'm queer, right? And we're trying to be ourselves and live our lives and not have to deal with neglect and lack of representation, lack of access to the same general rights and same general infrastructure and systems that everybody else does. And as long as we keep pushing forward with that, we're going to eventually we'll win little by little. We'll chip away at it and we will win. But in the meantime, there's going to be a lot of uncomfortable attention. We're going to have people proposing bathroom bills and stuff, and people starting to police bathrooms and do very uncomfortable things like that. And this is what you see when you're effectively winning. When there are people that are pushing back, that means that you're winning. That means that they're scared. So that means that we need to continue pushing so that we can have the same rights as everybody else and the same representation within our communities and our countries.
Thanks so much. Neo? Gaia?
Yeah, it was great listening to Morai and Sonia and Fanboy Mads talk about this. I don't know as much about that strategy, but I mean, I guess I've just been lucky that when I was much younger, I just met trans people. Like before, there was all this culture war stuff. Just at that time, in those innocent days of like the mid 2000s, just ignorance. I remember the first time that I mentioned, like, I remember I talked about some trans woman I saw on the street, and I used the T word, tranny, and I was like, friend was like, "No, you can't say that. That's a bad word." I was like, "I didn't know that was a bad word. Never used it." Right? It was like I just didn't know. Yeah, so I just got lucky. I've known trans people since like the mid 2000s, and they were very patient. I remember I had a coworker whose husband was a trans man, and I just didn't know anything. So I was just like, "Oh, like, tell me about your life, like your relationship or whatever. How is that going for you guys?" Like she would tell me, my coworker, about the wild things they had to go through. But it just reminded me. So the original prop was like comparing it to like what gay people, queer people had to go through to like get not representation, positive change. And like I was just thinking about yeah, it's what Sonia was just saying with like when you're winning, there's like some backlash. Because I remember in 2008 there was Prop 8. I think it was 2008. Prop 8 in California, which is terrible. It tried to ban gay marriage. I mean, it tried to, right, ban gay marriage. And that was actually why was it on the ballot? It was on the ballot
Yeah.
because gay rights had made such progress in the 90s and like early 2000s. People were like, "Oh no, the gays have been accepted." Like, and there was a lot of fear. Obviously, there was a lot of fear mongering that around that, and then it was found unconstitutional anyway. But like, it's just wild to think California. People think California is this hippie place, and it has it's more liberal than other parts of the country. But it's like in 2008, like a majority of voters voted to ban gay marriage. Like, but like there was that moment of that was a very embarrassing, horrible moment. But since then, it's moved. It's pretty mainstream. Gay people are pretty mainstream, and it just to me, I guess, what I would say is just as we had that fight like in the 90s, 2000s to mainstream gay rights, into the early 2010s. So like it seems to me after that the trans issue was being more like, well, oh, okay, we accept it. What about gender non-conforming people or trans people? That became like the next like thing, right? Where people were like, oh, I don't understand this, or whatever. But yeah. So I think great things have been said by everyone already. But that's all I have to say really right now.
Okay. Pixie. If you're speaking, we can't hear you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so the question is about kind of like what's better, bad representation or no representation at all. I try to do some research this afternoon, and I have found research to confirm, I think what we all know to be true, that like positive representation is a massive boon in public support, as simple as it sounds, like as apolitical as possible, just slip more diversity into movies and advertising and stuff. And it does seem to kind of normalize different types of people. I can link in the group chat we have one study that was done that by a brand, I believe it's Procter and Gamble, and they are only responsive to whatever's profitable, right? Whatever people happen to like, and they found overwhelming evidence that people like LGBTQ plus positive representation, and that sticks, and there's good support for that, and it actually improves support for queer people. And then as far as like, is negative representation bad? I couldn't find anything directly on whether no representation at all does anything, but I assume it has no effect. But I did find one study that's looking at like violent protests, and how that affects how people support and identify with a group. So this can apply to stuff like civil rights protests, which are morally good, as well as stuff like Charlottesville, which is morally bad. But in both cases, they seem to kind of backfire in terms of support. So I think we have evidence that, like, ideally positive support and representation, but if you have to choose between nothing and negative, I think negative representation only seems to kind of backfire and make things worse.
Okay. Oh yeah, open to the panel. Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah. I'd like to. I'd like to know what we're talking about when we talk about negative representation. Are we talking about specific crimes committed? Or are we talking about like attacks? Or are we talking about, because both of those things can be negative. Like we could admit that like an attack on a trans person is a negative representation, and we could also admit that like a trans person committing a crime is negative representation. Because if we go by attacks and things like that, we have to remember that unfortunately
Sorry, someone's typing.
Matthew.
Someone's typing. We can hear it a lot. So please, whoever is typing, please mute yourself, because we can hear all of it. Continue, fanboy. And this is not necessarily representation. I mean, that doesn't really. I'm not sure this is like a crime concept representation. Just like the attention that people are that the movement is receiving, right? That the community is receiving. So yeah, that sort of attention, whether it be it's better to just have this negative attention and a lot of it is being received, or simply no attention at all. People have no idea. Go ahead, please.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a hard one, because before that, the gay community suffered from a lot of negative attention, and then Matthew Shepard happened, and then suddenly we had the Matthew Shepard or the John Bird legislation, which made it a hate crime to attack gay and lesbian individuals. So when it comes down to that, the first thing is I mean, I don't know. there's utility in representation over non-representation. That's always going to be my position.
Okay. Anyone else?
Yeah, I feel like no matter what, having a bit of representation is generally positive because it leads to a conversation. If you have no representation, people don't know who you are, and it doesn't really matter. You're not going to get anything done. For example, I'm in Mexico right now, and the LGBTQ movement, it's going on here, right? If you go around, there's tons of pride flags. If you there are lots of gay couples, right? There's a big push for that. And I talk to people, and sometimes they'll use words like transvestite or something, even if they're allies, right? And just having those conversations, even if what they're talking about may be kind of wrong, flawed, or maybe even hostile. From there, you can have a conversation.
Thank you. I got your names mixed up previously. Sorry about that. But Siren, did you want to say something? And then Zonia.
Yeah. I was just gonna ask the same question about what negative representation would mean in the media, and then yeah, I think I agree with femboy maths. It's just protests are always gonna cause a discussion or discourse or whatever. It's kind of inevitable. And that's the point of protest too. So
And I don't even think. Oh no.
No, go ahead.
It doesn't even just have to be a protest. It could just be a really crude Tucker Carlson bit on Fox News, right? Just something like that, where he's talking about how trans people are destroying our culture, our culture. That can lead to a conversation, right? Even if it is negative, it is negative representation. It is something that we can talk about. It is something that we can sink our teeth into, and we can make a movement out of. That, hey, we're oppressed. We need representation, positive representation, and something needs to happen now, right?
Yeah, I see this as, well, the way that I read the question, it sounded to me like the idea was, would it be better to go back to the way things were 10 plus years ago when we weren't being talked about in the media, versus the kind of media attention we get now and the backlash that has resulted from it because of all the aggressive pushback? That's the way I read the question. And in my opinion, I think the latter is better. I don't think going back to being hidden is good for anybody. One of the big problems that we had with with people, or still have with people remaining hidden, is it creates isolation, it creates depression, it creates other issues, self-loathing. When you're trapped and you're not able to come out and you hide and you have to pretend to be somebody else, it is a recipe for disaster psychologically. And I know it because I did it for decades. So I did it for 25 years, roughly, something like that. And it's something that you need to be able to just be yourself and not have to worry. And the only way that we were able to do that is to fight this battle, which means that it's going to be an uphill battle, and there's going to be a lot of people pushing against us, and we just need to not give up. And then hopefully in the future, hopefully not far in the future, people won't have to deal with the stuff that we've had to deal with, and they won't have to isolate themselves, and they won't have to be fearful, and they won't have to question whether or not there's something wrong with them, whether or not they belong in society, etc.
Yeah. So it seems to me, I hear what you're saying, Zonia, but it seems to me that that this attention, right, I can see it both ways. That simply having a blank slate to work with, right, could be a better situation to be in. Right, like people have no idea or think this is a new thing. I mean, I've heard of trans individuals, right? You know, like maybe I've heard something negative, maybe I've just heard the name and just have no ideas attached to it. But I've heard about it. Tell me more about that. You're trans? Yeah. Well, what does that mean? Oh, really? Okay, right. Well, I don't really agree with that. You know, I'm religious and all that, but I mean, it's each their own. You know, whatever. I feel like that might be a better situation to be in. You know, for, even if because now people there are so many like negative emotions and ideas attached, right? You know, like predator attached to these things, um, or or deviant or something like that, right? These things are all being attached actively by the conservative movement, um, and so now it's like an uphill battle, right? It's like, oh no, I know what you are. Yeah, I know what you are. And I'm going to keep you out of this space because of that, right? Uh, so, I mean, what do you think of that, Tonya?
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So uh it's interesting because that's kind of how I lived life. And I was living life as sort of I called myself a cross dresser at the time. And so in like at work, I presented masculine, but when I got home and when I spent time with close friends, I presented feminine oftentimes. And and so as I got to know people, yeah, it allowed me like this gradual introduction for them where as I got to know people, and they got to know me, I could kind of introduce them to who I am, and it seemed pretty easygoing. Whereas these days, people are constantly trying to clock trans women in the public space and give us looks, and if you end up telling somebody, like if you are very good at quote passing, and you tell somebody that you are trans, suddenly they've had their head previously filled with a lot of propaganda that gives them a visceral reaction, a negative reaction to it, and it unfortunately creates a prejudice. So there is that problem, but the counter to that is that we continue living in the dark and living a double life for those of us who have a little bit more to have to go through in order to quote pass, which is like me, for instance. I'm 6'1". I'm a pretty broadly built person, so I have a lot of hoops to go through in order to have the privilege in a way of just people not even noticing me, right? And so but you kind of have to go through the hurdles. You have to push through the barriers in order to pave the way for people like myself and others who have a little bit more to go through in order to not be noticed, as not be clocked as people are doing. But there's literal guides out there right now where they're telling people, here's what to look for the Adam's apple, look for this, look for that. And that's what we have to go through to get to the point where the rest of us can live a normal life, or a normal enough life.
You had your hand up previously, Gaia, and then Femboy.
Sorry, I was just going in a different direction, so I'm not gonna respond directly to your question, but I was just curious of thinking of like, so nations don't exist in a bubble, especially in the internet age. I was just thinking of how androids have made substantial progress in Latin America in the last 5 years, especially. Um, and then I don't know. I lived in one Latin American country for like 1 year, like 5 years ago, but I just noticed like I said nations are not in a bubble, so like a lot of several, I don't want to say a lot, several Latin American countries like allowed trans people to change their gender and their name now. In the last 5 years, and I think it's like a momentum. So the fight started somewhere. I mean, obviously, I think Europe was on it a little bit sooner than the U.S., but but that's influencing it. So it's not even as long. So it's an interesting question that you posed about how do you get people, how do you move the movement forward? But like, just even that's something important to remember, that like the work being done here or another or anywhere can influence. It can ripple out. It has ripple out, because we're talking about Latin America. When I'm talking about these Latin American countries are finally like allowing some trans rights. They don't. Almost all of these countries have abortion is banned. Like, they are very socially conservative generally. So the fact that this is rippling to that is something very positive to see. That just remember, like, yeah, represent struggle is like international, and if people see, oh, these people in this country now have these rights, we can too.
Boy.
Yeah, I want to respond to two things. With Neo, right? As I said, I lived in Mexico for quite a long time, 5 years when I was younger, right? And I visit every once in a while because I have family here, and the progress I've seen here is absolutely insane, right? Before, the idea, like, even to this day, it's still done, but not as much. Like, using gay as an insult, or just the stereotypes surrounding it. Like, right now, I've probably seen it's not even hyperbolic. Of course, I'm in a bigger city when I'm in Mexico, but still, I've probably seen more open gay couples in Mexico in my 5 days here than I have in all my time living in the South in the United States, right? Which is 4 years. So just showing that absolute progress that's been going on here. Of course, big city, the capital of the country, right? Of course, it's gonna be a bit more progressive than the rest of it, but still, it's something I didn't see 4 years ago when I used to live here. If you go to the main plaza, there are pride flags of genders or sexualities I didn't even know about. Like, okay, like, it's so crazy, and it's amazing to see. So yeah, it's definitely an international struggle. And to what Primes was saying before, you're making an example about sometimes if someone just doesn't know anything, right, it is more positive, right? Because it's more easy to persuade someone onto your side, right? But I feel like that example only works if we're thinking in a vacuum, right? In real life, right? If we go back 10, 20 years to when trans issues weren't really talked about, there were still those negative thoughts on them, right? If you were to tell someone that, hey, I think I might be a girl or I might be a guy, right? You'd still get a visceral reaction, even if they didn't really know it, even if there wasn't like a huge media network basically running on hating on trans people or the left in general, right? So yeah, I feel like in a vacuum that example works, but in reality, most trans people, regardless of how actively hostile our environment is, will always get that hostility.
So I'm thinking of, and it's apparently really bad. Like, they're like, if I'm not an expert in it, but like, they're rolling back rights in England, right? There was that conservative majority there, and this turf ideology, like, which is being like enhanced by famous people like J.K. Rowling, right? Like, it's a like, if I was in a similar situation, let's return to the black rights. I mean, when I'd be, it's terrifying, right? Be terrified for myself, terrified for my friends, terrified for my family, and like, it's so the situation I'm imagining is less people suffering in silence, which is what Zonia was talking about, right? Like, but more that it's simply not an issue within the zeitgeist, right? So like, there is a movement that is fighting for advancement, and happens all the time, right? So there are many movements that are existing right this moment, right? And there are people who are out there making progress, or not making progress, or whatever, but like, we couldn't name all these things, right? Like, you may be aware of some, right? But they just aren't in the mainstream. If you're not politically connected, you may have never even heard of them, right? So if we were back in that situation, where again, that movement is active, it's not that our trans brothers and sisters are necessarily like trying to hide themselves in the closet. It's just that, it's not what's talked about. Like the fact that on this channel we've talked about trans women and sports like so many goddamn times. Oh my God. But people want to talk about it. People want to talk about it. Like they want to discuss this thing, right? And so it's like a hot topic. But because it's a hot topic, well, it's full of hate. Like there wouldn't be like so right now it's like what's happening is that there's laws that are being passed, right, that are against trans individuals, right? And so people are saying like, well, this is what winning looks like, but is it? I mean, it's literally at least in the States. I don't know about any other nations. I can't say that. But for in the States, they passed like over 100 laws, right? It's actively getting worse. So I'm imagining a political environment where, yes, trans individuals are around and are not necessarily trying to hide themselves, but like are going to lawmakers and saying, well, this is my story. This is what I'm struggling with, right? These are the issues that my community are facing. And can you help me out, right? And that lawmaker, you know, question mark above their head, I don't really know much about this, but okay, sure. Rather than, okay, well, my constituency, specifically because they've been filled with hate from like the hate spewing right, they don't like you. And so now I'm not sure if I can really sign on to this, you know? Moria?
Real quick, I wanted to say that like this is we definitely live in a very uncertain time. Like just doing like cursory Google that's somebody brought up in my chat.
Yeah, sorry, your sound cut out. Hello?
Apparently there was a
Neo, can anyone else hear? Hello? No.
big fight about
Neo.
Cutting out.
Neo.
a spot.
Okay, she can't hear us at all, unfortunately.
Oh,
Neo, can you hear us? All right, yeah,
yeah.
your sounds keep it's cutting in and out, and we're like we're hearing bits and pieces.
Oh.
Try leaving the Discord and then jump back into the waiting room, and I'll pull you back in, and maybe that'll fix it. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Also, I can't raise my hand, but I can do sparkles in my eyes to signify I am similarly like waiting for a turn. That helps.
Sure. Let's on 1 second. Where's hopefully Neil will come back in a second. Okay. I'm sorry, but if you want to say something now, I guess we'll go ahead and we'll get to Moria later. Go ahead, Pixie.
Sure. So one thing I would like to kind of analyze, we've been kind of brushing past, is though in recent times, especially in the US, like there has been an increase in positive and negative awareness of LGBT people and issues. Negative attention does not necessarily mean things are better. It's really that the positive attention is what makes things better, and negative attention hurts. And it's really that in the US right now, like it's a net positive, as all the data is showing. But if I think, I don't know, like the core premise of the question kind of presupposes that's how it shakes out, which to me is kind of like a dangerously online and just a bit like privileged perspective, because there are other countries like Poland or whatever, even like deep red states where increased attention and the negative attention is not necessarily a good thing.
Yeah. Fine. Let's go to Siren and then Moria. If we can hear her, then we'll go to Gaia.
All right. I was going to say, I think me and Femboy Maths pointed this out, that negative attention or the negative attitudes towards trans people is always there, or it was always there, you know? Like it's not, I don't want to say it's not increasing, because I think it's just the voices of TERFs and, you know, anti-trans people are just louder than, you know, than than the rest of us pro LGBT people. Yeah, like I said it before, it's just like putting a flashlight on the people who are speaking the loudest.
Thank you. Let's go to Maths and then Gaia.
So the American story of civil rights has always been two steps forward, two steps forward, one step back, right? It goes all the way to the inception of our country, right? We got rid of slavery. Oh, we got Jim Crow. We got the civil rights laws. Oh, then we get like weird systemic things that still live on to this day, right? I feel like with trans things, this is kind of the same thing we're seeing. We've gotten lots of good legislation passed. We've gotten lots of good awareness, but right now we're seeing that blowback, right? And I feel like that's inevitable with any large civil rights. I don't really know what to do with that. I don't really know what the right way to manage that is. But given how it's worked out historically, this is kind of a weird deterministic way of viewing it. It's like, hey, you know, in the past, this is generally how it's worked out, so maybe it'll work itself out this time. I don't know. It's really dumb, but I'm just trying to fix it into past patterns.
Gaia?
I just wanted to bring up, like, I don't know if I would say it's getting worse for trans rights. It's not like great. It's not great to see what's happening in Republican controlled states. It's horrible. But just recently, we can't forget they had that ruling where Title IX protects students, it protects students, including on sexual orientation and gender identity. That was huge. So like, it just made me think of like, okay, like it's different now with the Supreme Court, but like being a ultra conservative majority. But for a long time, what Republicans would do would be pass all these laws about abortion exactly because they could say to their base, like, "Oh, look, we hate abortion," but they would pass a law, but it would be struck down, right? Because the Supreme Court was like, "You can't do that." So it's just like a throwing meat base thing. So we're not there yet at all. But just not great. But I was just thinking like things. There's been substantial improvements recently in like the federal levels. So I wonder if I don't know. Obviously, that's the intent of the Republicans. Is like the reason they have in the last year these bills is to like distract from things that actually I don't know, like to distract. They just want to do the culture war stuff, right? They're like, okay, this hate's been there forever. Like, let's just do this so we don't talk about these other things that would be unfavorable to us. So anyway, I just wanted to bring that up because it just reminded me of like I don't know the state level. Okay, so the state level progress and the federal are different, but like if ever the filibuster is like taken down, like they will probably finally enshrine anti-discrimination laws for trans people. Because that's been like I've seen that. I remember when I protested for I wrote when I like in like 2008ish, I think, or around then. Me and my friends protested like because they were gonna do this. The House, Nancy Pelosi passed like some anti-discrimination bill for queer people, but not trans people. And we were like, include trans people, Nancy Pelosi. But anyway, so that progress has been made where I don't know. Obviously, the thing keeping this just type of legislation from passing is the filibuster, which is a whole other issue. But if we ever get control of Congress, Democrats, we're pretty close to getting that passed. So I just want to say that the progress is uneven depending on you're talking about the state or federal level and where you are, obviously.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Maury, go ahead.
Yeah, is my audio better?
Yeah.
By the way? Okay. First of all, like the first thing is that we have to remember the fact that like in America right now, 1 in 10 people knows a trans person, whether they know it or not. Like that is a statistic that we now know from just Pew Research. We know that there are 9 states that currently have it illegal for anything transition related to be covered by their state Medicare. And we know that there are states that are not only actively enforcing separate bathrooms, but now also going the extra step further of verifying the actual gender identity of a person. Now, when it comes to the notion that the Equality Act needs 100% Democrats to pass, I would like to just like bring back the idea that like remember when the Civil Rights Act passed, there wasn't a lot of support for it from the public. So just the idea that some people have some basic empathy, even though the Republican Party super, super, super loves to do the culture war thing, there are some people like Liz Cheney who very, very sympathetic to the cause. And when it comes down to it, if the Supreme Court, which is literally stacked full of people that would overturn Roe v. Wade given the correct case, will rule that gender identity is something that you cannot discriminate against, I want to have a little bit of faith in knowing that perhaps maybe like all of the stuff that we have fought for is not in vain. Because you have to remember that the struggle for trans rights, like this isn't like an incredibly new phenomenon. Like even back in the 80s, we had psychologists like Blanchard trying to like classify us as just like, oh, like actually they're not like trans people aren't like a real type of people. They're just like, weird perverts. Remember, like Blanchard's the discredited psychologist that came up with the idea that, there's a fetish involved with it. If anybody remembers the Blanchard scale.
Is this
So
the
this-
androgen thing? Or my
It's
or,
AGP and something, I don't know.
I'm sorry, I guess I don't know. If you could explain it.
Okay, so the idea for the Blanchard test, as best as I can remember it, is that there's two types of trans people. There's homosexual trans, which are trans people that transition and date men, and then there are people that are autogyno something like
gynophilia.
Gynophilia.
yeah, which he classified as a fetish. Now that's been disproven, and the whole, oh, they're predators in the bathroom. Oh, they're just waiting to stalk and attack. They're just waiting behind everything. Like the gay rights movement had to suffer through that as well. And look at where we're at now. Like 48% of Republicans still support gay marriage. 28% of those that vote Republican leaning support gay marriage. So, like, honestly, I want to have faith that we don't just live in a complete and total hell world. And also not have like so much gloom.
Femboy?
I just wanted to give a quick little note. I've seen a bit that although I'm on your side, not 100%, I'm still kind of iffy on the subject, but I'm sort of leading on the side that negative representation can be positive in the long run. I feel like some people here are kind of diminishing the negative representation that does exist, right? It's not just it isn't just some wacko screaming outside that trans women are actually men, right? It is actual legislation at this point, right? It's some of the biggest cable news stations in all the United States, right? It is a real issue, and as I said, I'm still pretty mixed on it. I'm just kind of playing on this side just to try to feel it out, but it is really tough, and there are real sacrifices that will have to, if you have this position that you'll have to take, right? I live in a red state, really red state. I mean, just a couple of years ago, there was the whole trans right, the bathroom bill that passed in my state, right? Just recently, they wanted to not allow anyone under the age of 21 to get trans HRT, right? Which is pretty crazy. So there are real risks involved, and I feel like we still have to acknowledge that. Even if you're on the one side.
You want to respond to that, and then we'll go to Zonia.
Yeah,
and I'm not sure, Pixie, if is your hand up, or I wasn't sure.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So, Maureen.
Yeah, I'm not seeking to like discredit the fact that there are people that are out there actively trying to sabotage it. There are channels like Fox News that are actively trying to promote scare stories that like are either completely fictional or didn't even happen, or that they can present just because they could go, well, we've heard that there are certain kinds of things going down at this particular XYZ establishment kind of place. But the thing is like we have to endure this, and it's sad to say that we have to endure it, because no matter what, even when it came up to the simple notion that back in the 60s it was a wild idea that Black people should even be able to use the same bathrooms, Strom Thurmond filibustered for over 48 hours to try to get that bill denied. And I would 100% put money down that Ted Cruz would probably do the same thing today in terms of the Equality Act. It's already happened in Ohio with the Ohio Fairness Act. They have a competing bill now in the Ohio State Senate, which is to impose bathroom signs and genital inspections on high schoolers, which is sad to see, especially since Representative Thomas West in Ohio has fought really hard to get that through 2 sessions of Congress.
Well, let's go to was it Sonia? You had your hand up, yep, and then we'll go to Pixie.
Yeah. So another thing to keep in mind also is that prior to this modern awareness of the trans community, we had to deal silently with a continuous stream of, or continuous misrepresentation of basically us or something equated to us in media. There were numerous movies that I grew up with that had a trans or cross-dressing person who was a serial killer, stalker, rapist, etc. And I grew up with that. And that actually was part of the reason why it took me so long to come out publicly about being trans, because that's what I thought people would think of me. And it was something that, it's, you just basically, as long as you don't push yourself out there and make yourself known and try to bring more of an awareness, then that will continue to be the thing that works against you, right? Will continue to be represented as freaks and as criminals and stuff like that, predators, etc. So we can't just allow that to happen. We have to step forward and come out and say, hey, we're just like you. All right. So, something else to bring up.
Yeah, Zonia, my question sort of sets up a binary, but we can understand that before this moment, right, this modern era of trans hate, that the trans individuals still got a lot of hate, right? They were still misunderstood, and like you said, bringing up media like Silence of the Lambs is like probably the most famous example, or Psycho is another one, where there was a trans individual cross-dressing individual, like how they refer to them, and yes, they were a threat, right? They were a problem, and let's psychologically analyze them, right? And tell you like what's wrong with this person, and look out, your son or daughter might grow up to be like this, right? And then even in this moment, right, where trans people have never had as much attention as they have at this point, there are still individuals who are so disconnected that they actually don't know anything, right? So it's not like a strict binary here, right? This is kind of like we're working off a spectrum. So that's interesting. Pixie?
Yeah, so I would like to talk about just a couple ways to improve inclusion a little bit and get more of this positive attention representation, which is, it changes so much. Like I'm lesbian, and when I was growing up, like I was evil in media, and now some of like the best shows out there, especially aimed at kids, are like super inclusive and diverse. And like I think that honestly getting LGBT people not only to feature positively in media, but also to write and create that media is a huge deal. So there's one organization called Queerty Gamers, and what they do is they specifically try to raise money and give like little micro grants, just enough for like a laptop or software, to LGBT people trying to get into like game development and stuff like that. As well as, honestly, they're just on the legislation front. There's the Equality Act, which will create more solid, more immovable anti-discrimination protections, which should be an easy sell even to conservatives who say that like, oh, there's no legalized discrimination in the US, because there is. As well as even the gay and trans panic defense are still around. So I'm posting a couple links in your Twitch chat, because like these are things we can absolutely change. And yeah, there's still a lot to be done.
Why do you think this would be an easier sell to conservatives? I was a little confused about that.
Because lots of conservatives oppose more nebulous concepts of like systemic discrimination, because they can't see any law that makes something explicitly legal, but like the Equality Act is trying to patch. And again, like the gay and trans defense, like is still a thing. Like there are clear examples where it is specifically okay to discriminate things like housing and jobs, and even like murder, like being a murder victim, if the victim is LGBTQ. And so these should be fairly reasonable things. Just being like, hey, isn't that messed up? That's still allowed. And I think a lot of them would say, yeah, based on conversations I've had.
So okay, but you're unless I'm mistaken, you're talking to like individual like Republicans or whatever, right? Like people of conservative bent, right? Like, but when
Yeah.
we're talking about lawmakers, so then they have all the incentive in the world to say no, right?
I mean, it's a pretty hard sell to say like, why is it okay to murder someone just because they're gay or trans?
You're not then. Okay, so if I was a conservative, right, and I'm most certainly not, but if I was a conservative and you came to me with this, right, I said, well, I'm not supporting that. I'm not supporting violence. No, I'm supporting families. I'm supporting the classical nuclear family, and this doesn't fit into that, right? And yeah, like what you're proposing is a threat to that structure. Well, that's what I'm defending.
Mm,
And
It's
in a way, I could see where Prime's coming from, but like even if I could talk to like Beyond the Tags and get Beyond the Tags to agree 100% with me that trans panic defenses need to go, I feel like there is a way to move the conversation beyond like, well, it's not a disruption to the family. It's just a get out of jail free card. And you could tie into the fact that, hey, like this will also clear out a lot of courts. This will also clear out a lot of issues that are going on with courts. And this is also going to save you a lot of money when it comes to tax dollars spent on public defenders, because most people who plead trans panic defenses normally use public defenders, just based off the data I've seen.
So, okay, it sounds like you two are assuming good faith here, and I think you're assuming way too much. But I want to let Gaia and then Mavs talk, and then I can respond. Go ahead, Gaia.
Okay, sorry, I'm gonna answer your question right now. Prime, but I just wanted to go to slightly. I just wanted to bring up something because obviously positive representation is like super important. But okay. So in 2000, it's not exactly trans issues, but it's related to gender nonconforming, being gender nonconforming. In 2019, a very famous Latin American astrologist named Walter Mercado died, and he was just like, I have to post it. If you don't know who Walter Mercado is, I'll put this in the chat on the Twitch and in the Discord. Like, he's just very genderqueer. But anyway, it was just funny when he died. Like, all of Latin America and everyone who watched like Univision in the US were like, Walter Mercado died. Like, anyway, according to the New York Times, he had 120 million like people watching him at his horoscopes like every day for like decades. But so like he would wear capes. He was very androgynous. Like I actually, when I was a kid, I thought he was like a woman for a while, and then I realized he was a guy. I mean that he was, but he never identified as like trans or non-binary or whatever until late in life, because it was just there wasn't people didn't use these terms for like I don't know. It just was not important to him until recently, until right before he died. So I was just thinking about that when he died. I just realized I was like, wait a minute. I was like, here's this like very gender non-conforming person that was there my whole life. We all loved him. We all loved him. Well, not everyone, but he had very positive representation. And it was just like, just think about it. I was like, oh, when I was thinking about it, I was like, wait, did I ever see this kind of thing in like, American channels that are in English? And I was like, no, it was like only like on Univision we had our very queer person, like our very gender bending thing, and it was just like there. It was part of the culture. This is very interesting. I'm sure there was lots of homophobic stuff said about him, but like, I just wanted to bring that up because, like, yeah, I just wanted to bring that up because I was curious. Also, like, I don't know, people have their ideas of immigrants are necessarily more like homophobic. People think like people from the third world are necessarily more homophobic or whatever, which is not necessarily the case. But that they're more transphobic. Because I'm like, wait, Walter, I'll post the pictures of Walter Mercado. He was so fabulous. Like, Anyway, sorry, just wanted to bring that little tangent in.
Mass.
So what Pixie was saying, right? Hey, you're right. You know, if a Republican really does just care about like making sure that there isn't any discrimination in the world, because that's what they say, right? That there isn't any discrimination, and obviously if there was, if you're Republican, you know, you'd vote to end that discrimination. But if we go to like the real life examples, the last time there was the Equality Act was actually passed in the House, and you know how many Republicans voted for it? 3. You know how many against it? 206. So I feel like if there was any case where we could like have an example of how Republicans would vote, it would be that, because that was Republicans voting, and they overwhelmingly voted against it to strike it down. It's still passed the House, and it's going to go to the Senate sometime. It's probably going to meet a bad fate, given the filibuster still exists, and as we see, they're not probably going to vote for it.
So I'm gonna, in case you don't know what the Equality Act is, I'm just gonna read the top paragraph on Wikipedia. The Equality Act is a bill in the United States Congress that, if passed, would amend the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to prohibit discrimination on the basis of sex, sexual orientation, and gender identity in employment, housing, public accommodations, education, federally funded programs, credit, and jury service. Supreme Court's June 2020 ruling in Bostock v. Clayton County, Georgia, protects gay and transgender people in matters of employment, but not in other respects. The Bostock ruling also covered the Altitude Express and Harris Funeral Homes cases. Okay, I don't know what those are. But yeah, so just in case anyone didn't know what that is. And so, yeah, I'm looking through this, right? And understanding conservatives, right? Like, when people who want to preserve the status quo, right, which is what conservatives want to do, right, they preserve the status quo, and then they as well say that the systemic discrimination doesn't exist, right? So it seems like you're hearing that and saying, oh, okay, well, it does exist, right? Your response is, well, it does exist, and this is a way to stomp it out. And so because you're against discrimination, then you'll tag team with us. But what they're saying is, no, it doesn't exist. It's not a problem. And what you're bringing here is a way to destroy the family, right? You're trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist. So no, I'm not going to help you. And this will actively make things worse for society as it stands. So that's how I feel conservatives will act, and it seems like that's how they've acted in the past. Does Maura or Pixie? I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, like, okay, so obviously it's a really sticky issue. Like, we cannot say strictly that this is just a Republican thing, because we know that Tulsi Gabbard was the person that introduced the whole, keep softball women's, like, biological woman only bill. So it's a very systemic problem when it comes to lawmakers in general. The Equality Act did pass. Now, it did meet some resistance. Everybody's going to obviously vote along party lines, but I feel like the more that people are exposed, the more that people see that we're just trying to live normal lives, we're just trying to get the same respect that everybody else does, that I guess maybe my faith in humanity has not yet been completely and utterly destroyed, but I would hope that at least some would take the path that they did with the Civil Rights Act and say either this passes or it's going to go to the Supreme Court, and based off of the Supreme Court's voting history, it's going to we're going to immediately get overturned. All of these rules that we're putting in place are going to be deemed unconstitutional. These are going to be deemed segregationist. These are going to be deemed invasive. These are going to be deemed unconstitutional in a myriad of forms.
So, but Moria, and someone correct me if I'm wrong, but from my understanding is that when the Civil Rights Act passed, that we had massive Democratic majorities and a Democratic president. So there was that. And then Supreme Court is firmly in the hands of conservatives right now, because Donald Trump was able to elect or nominate three judges, put them on the bench. So again, in that situation, why, as a conservative, the Democratic majority is not being, well, we have Democratic majorities, but the filibuster is in place, and so nothing's going to happen. With a roadblock within the legislative branch and the judicial branch, like definitely on my side and not your side, why would I ever budge an inch on this? I have no incentive to.
The two cases that have been brought up to the Supreme Court involving specifically trans issues have overwhelmingly ruled in favor of trans issues, even with them being extremely conservatively stacked. I highly doubt that somebody's going to go against the right to privacy when it comes to Florida. I highly doubt that somebody's going to say that it's not segregationist to put placards up in bathrooms. I just don't see how a court that deems itself so constitutionally so what was the description? Or constitutional literalists or literal constitutionists. Anybody that anybody that reviews the Florida law, should it be taken to the Supreme Court, would obviously see that as a violation. I don't see them. I've seen some good things get struck down in the Supreme Court, but when it comes to trans issues, overwhelmingly all of the cases brought to them have
overwhelmingly, but you mean two?
Yeah, but I mean when it's 2-2 and one of them is literally, does discrimination apply to trans people, and it goes through. The Supreme Court says yes, you can't discriminate against trans people. I would say that they would likely vote in favor that it is a violation to search a person to inspect their genitals or to put up specific signs.
Bostock is a really solid ruling, and the Supreme Court is not like super partisan. That's the entire point of the Supreme Court.
Oh, definitely disagree. I definitely disagree on that one. I've had large arguments on this platform. I completely disagree. That's exactly, of course they're partisan. Of course, Femboy, I see your hand up. We'll definitely get to you. And Sonia as well. Of course they're partisan. If there wasn't partisan, right, then why would there be a big fight? Well, the Supreme Court is a neutral. They call things balls and strikes, right? They just call them as they see them. So why is there a big fight every time? I'm sorry, Femboy, we can hear like the whatever you're doing with the food or something. So if you can mute yourself, thank you. If that wasn't the case, then why would it be so much pressure, so much anxiety about like the ages of members of the Supreme Court? Because this is a high stakes, and of course they're partisan. They rule. If you look at their total rulings, right, not just the cases you're talking about, right, there's been a lot of party line rules because they're partisan, right? Like,
then why are they upholding trans rights?
No, okay. So, it's just because they are mostly partisan doesn't mean that they can't break, right, and do things that are unexpected, right? So the case you brought up is actually a really good example of that, right? But I'm saying it's more of an exception rather than the rule. Right? So
it is the rule. It's 2 for 2. It is the rule.
That's not the two makes a pattern. 2 makes a pattern. That makes a pattern to you? That's it's. I mean, that's good. I mean, it's good. I'm happy. And I would want this to continue, right? But I simply would not add with this current makeup. I wouldn't say that I would hold up as the court as the path for success. For our transgender brothers and sisters. Like I want it to be. I like to be wrong. I want to be wrong on this.
On the basis of what do you draw that conclusion?
On
like what are you pointing to?
Literally everything else. We can literally go down.
Except for the 2 rulings actually pertaining to this topic where they rule directly against what you're saying they do.
Sure. Okay. But I'm saying, hold on. I'm saying that that just because like with civil rights, right? In terms of in terms of like voting rights, right? And they'll have rulings that are in favor that uphold these things, and then they don't, right? It doesn't necessarily. So I'm not. If I see something in my favor, it's not that I necessarily will say, well, okay, we reached some sort of turning point. I'm going to look at their entire record, not just on this, but in other things that relate to this, right? So if there are two cases, that's a good sign, certainly. But I'm saying that to assume that makes it that if more cases come to the court, that they will rule in your favor. I don't think it's a great plan. But
What would be their
let's
legal
go.
argument for that?
I don't know.
Okay,
I don't know what the legal arguments would be. I don't know.
Well, they've made two so far.
okay.
So,
Go ahead. Go ahead, Mass.
do we-
Hold on. We'll go to Mass, and then we'll go to Zonia, please.
Yeah, one, I feel like it's pretty hard to say anything about the Supreme Court, whether it's like super partisan or not, given like that I know of two cases, right? For all we know, these could have been liberal flukes or they could just be actually doing what they think is right? We don't know unless we see other things that I just don't know of. It just seems weird to try to call it one way or the other.
Exactly. Yeah. That's the
well,
point.
no,
Not
no,
to call it one
actually,
way or the other.
Actually, no. I feel like what you're saying, Prime, is more of a I don't know what to call it, but you're placing of judgment on them, and I feel like you have to prove that more than just what exists right now. Right, from what we've seen right now, it seems like they're pretty liberal, and you're trying to assign a judgment on that. I feel like you can't really do that
Liberal?
with the necessary proof.
Do you call these?
Are like they're liberals, or like the rulings have been like liberal leaning, right? If we were to put them on a political spectrum.
On these two cases?
Yeah, that's what I said. Like I only know of two. For all I know, the rest of them could be like, actually, we hate all gay people. For all I know, I doubt it.
Yeah.
Into it near. Oh
no, continue, please.
Into it with more I was saying earlier about how we can sort of like tell representatives what the right thing to do is, and that they'll sooner or later realize that maybe it is just in the best interest of the country for them to get their rights. But at the same time, that is assuming that this is going to sound really weird, that politicians are people, because to all extents they really shouldn't function as people. Politicians should just be the representatives of their district or of their state, right? They shouldn't really have their own opinions, right? They should just represent what the voters want, right? That's why they're voted in, because they are what their voters want. That's why they're there. So to like say that we could just change the representatives' minds, we would have to. It's more complicated than that. We'd have to change the voters' mind in reality, right? And this is like a huge. This would be a huge task, right? We'd have to do a lot of things in the media. We'd have to do a lot of things on the ground representation and yada yada.
Let's go to Sonia, please.
Yeah. So, okay, so much has been opened up now. I'm going to start with first thing from the top. So we're talking about Supreme Court issues and laws that are being made that target us and where the Supreme Court's going to go. Well, first and foremost, one thing that I pasted in our little group DM is one of the earlier articles that I remember of a cis woman who had been barred from entering the women's bathroom because she didn't fit what someone else thought should be, traditional feminine look. And this isn't the only story. There's actually a bunch of these stories that have happened since then. That was the first one that was really documented, that made big news at the time. But there have been many incidents both before and since. And the targeting, the legislation, and also the hateful rhetoric that is targeting trans women is also targeting cis women. And many cis women who don't adhere to the more traditional, what a lot of people would consider to be the more traditional feminine aesthetic, are getting swept up in these in this type of anti-trans scrutiny. And so these issues are affecting more than just trans people. When these issues go to the Supreme Court, we're going to start hearing a lot more cases that are not just trans women, for arguing against these hateful laws, but also for cis women. And part of what we can do to that is by reaching out to the broader community about that. But then another thing also is allyship and advocacy on the conservative end of the spectrum. And that's something that I try to do, and I try to do it mindfully. I'm not the only one who does it here. This is also something that Neo does, Neo Morai. We both talk to conservatives. We have conservatives that we would call friends, and we build relationships and networks with people who come from an end of the political spectrum that largely does not support us. And building those bridges helps provide this, first of all, normalizes us and helps provide more allies on the side where we're having issues. Well, one of the biggest problems that you have dealing with trying to work with, trying to change the mind of conservatives is that when you're perceived as being on the opposite side of the spectrum, oftentimes there's like a wall there, right? It's like, oh, well, I can dismiss your opinions because you're on, the left side, right? And the more that we can befriend individual conservatives who are a little more open-minded and willing to listen to us, the more they can convince other conservatives and normalize us. And so, as I hang out with other conservatives that I've befriended, I'm also meeting others within their community that are conservative. And they're slowly kind of getting to know me and going, oh, I guess you're not quite what I thought you were. And now suddenly they're talking to me and then they're DMing me. And then sometimes a conservative comes to me and says, I think I might actually be trans or something. I literally had that happen not that long ago. I know another friend of mine who had that happen not that long ago. And so it flows. It's a longer, slower process to normalize us on the conservative end of the spectrum than it was on the more liberal and left-leaning end of the spectrum.
Gaia, you had your hand up previously, I think.
No, I just wanted to back up. Prime saying the Supreme Court is very political. I saw in the chat someone brought up, I saw some people saying, oh, most of their decisions are, sorry, Wick, I know you said most of their decisions are like unanimous, but the strategy, as far as I know, of like the right wing on the Supreme Court is they can't just like go and attack precedent like frontal assault. That's not what they do. So they have to get legitimacy. The way they get legitimacy for themselves is that they generally follow precedent for most things, except for very key things, which they were put on the court to do, which they are slowly moving towards, like, we're going for it. So a perfect example is Heller in 2008. It was a gun control. Okay, people don't know this. Most people don't know this. The Supreme Court did not recognize an individual's right to own a gun under the Second Amendment until 2008. Before that, they did not. It was like, there was like a tradition of like people can own guns, but it wasn't under the justification of like the Second Amendment of like as an individual right. It was not on the Supreme Court level. It just wasn't recognized like that. So that took decades. Like the NRA worked on that project for decades. Like I don't know how these new, I don't know how the Trump judges, especially what's his name, Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett. I don't know what their plans are for like people or like trans people, but like they're not just going to go on a frontal assault. That's not what they do. They have a plan. Their plan right now is mostly about abortion, but like they have a plan. They're not just going to attack it. Like it is unlikely that Roe versus Wade will just get struck down like in the next year or something. It's a very complicated plan.
So
I just wanted to bring that up because I just needed to say that the Supreme Court is very political. Just because most of their decisions are like, somebody brought up like. I don't know what the cases people were talking about here, but I saw someone else in chat. They just had a decision where they forced. I haven't read the decision, so I'm sorry if I'm misconstruing this. But as far as I understand, they're forcing the city of Philadelphia to contract with the anti-gay adoption agency. It's not just like, oh, I don't know. It's not just like, oh, let that. I don't know. They literally are forcing a city to use. They're like, you have to use this contractor. You're not allowed to not contract with them just because they're a religious anti-gay organization.
It's a Catholic organization.
Yeah. So like they're chipping away. That's like the Supreme Court right-wing strategy. Is like a chipping I totally would expect something like that from them. So, but that's intense because like that's an intense thing. They wouldn't usually like that's intense to compel the state to do business with somebody, except for like being like there's only a few protected classes, right? And I guess they're saying religious people, or I don't know, it's some attack on religion or something. But like, yeah.
If that was just a conservative plan to rule that way on that thing, then why did the Democratic-leaning Supreme Court justices also vote with the conservatives on that?
I don't know. That's a good question, but I don't know. I don't know, but I don't. I don't know, but they might actually. I don't know what the liberals. That's the thing. I haven't really followed what the liberal justices' ideas of like religious liberty are either.
So, the Bostock case, right? I'm looking at the case now, and if you could tell me what that other case you were referring to, Pixie or Moria, if you could tell me that other case you're referring to, I'll take a look at that as well. But I'm just looking at like the people who wrote on this. Well, it was Gorsuch, joined by Roberts, so the two conservatives, right? And Ginsburg, Breyer, Sotomayor, and Kagan. Well, Ginsburg is gone, right? So this was the past version of the court. Ginsburg is gone, replaced by Amy Coney Barrett, who's certainly more like our quote unquote Democratic champion in Ginsburg, replaced by an extremely religious conservative on the other end. Now, if that was the case, if that had been the makeup of the court, still it would actually pass because two conservatives flipped here, right? To make that, so it would still be a 5-4 decision in favor. But
then
hold
why?
on, let me finish my point. No, continue. Yeah. So it'll still be a 5-4 decision in favor. But I'm saying that like with a 6-3 split, 6-3 partisan split within the court, it just doesn't seem like a good plan, right? To use that as the path for success, right? Not that it can't, because literally it's happened before in the past that great civil rights. I was talking about freaking same-sex marriage, right? Progress right there, and I think it was under a conservative Supreme Court where Roberts broke with them, if I'm remembering this correctly. If I'm not, I'm so sorry. But so it's a possibility, right? And if we have two cases, that's also a possibility. I'm not contesting that. I want to make that very clear. I'm saying though, this wouldn't be the path that I would see as the most successful one. Instead, I would be thinking of how I could change the legislative branch so that it's more conducive to these issues. So let's go to Moria, and then if Pixie wants to respond.
Okay. First of all, the one case that I'm referencing that happened after the passing of Ginsburg was the case of Gavin Grimm's, which was a case that reinforced the notion that sex, as mentioned in the Civil Rights Act, refers to sex and gender refer to gender identity, not just biological sex. Now, being that they are Republicans, being that Amy Coney Barrett is from essentially a cult that is straight from The Handmaid's Tale, I would have completely expected that they would have said, actually, sex, when it comes to it's mentioned in the Civil Rights Act, refers specifically to biological sex. And this is a case that happened last month. So what I'm saying is that we have two cases, one when we had Ginsburg, one now, both upholding the notion that the Civil Rights Act interprets sex to mean not biological sex, but gender identity. And also, the other thing that I wanted to bring up is like if somebody challenges Florida all the way up to the Supreme Court on their shaky law that says that any school activity is subject to challenge by an official for genital inspection, fundamentally that would break the Fourth Amendment. Like drug sniffing dogs without probable cause are a violation of the Fourth Amendment. So I'm failing to see how we could go, okay, body and cavity searches and genital inspections without probable cause are already ruled to be unconstitutional due to the Fourth Amendment. Drug sniffing dogs, etc., are already unconstitutional without probable cause due to the Fourth Amendment. So I'm failing to see how they'd fundamentally overturn long-standing precedents like this, right? and why conservatives would not just say, well, actually, in the Civil Rights Act, when we drafted this, we actually meant biological sex, not gender identity, if that makes sense.
Mass, I see. I see you had your hand up, and I said you weren't going to go before. It's incredibly dark in your room. It's very hard to see you. So.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry.
If you could beat something, it's very hard. But go ahead, make your case, and we'll go to Pixie, and then Gaia. I think she had her hand up.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say about the Supreme Court case you guys were just talking about. The way that you guys mentioned it was kind of different from how the court case actually turned out.
Which one?
Saying
Which
that like
one, please.
The one with the Catholic Adoption Agency or whatever.
The contract dispute one.
Yeah. The way you guys were talking about it was like, hey, these people were just forced to do it, or the state was forced to what's it called? Have a contract with these people.
Contract that they signed.
Yeah. Yeah, and I feel like it's sort of the way you guys were talking about it. It kind of seemed like, oh, there was just no contract to begin with, right? They just were forced out of nowhere. At least that's how I interpreted it, when it's not really the case. At least the way you guys were talking about it. It just felt like it. All right,
yeah. Is that how you meant it, Gaia?
I just felt like that the fact that they were in a contract beforehand is really important context that you guys didn't mention.
Wait, no, I said I'm sorry if I misconstrued this. I obviously did misconstrue it a little bit. I'm just saying that. Oh yeah, sorry. I was just gonna say something different about just because the liberals at Supreme Court are liberal doesn't mean that they're that liberal. But I can wait.
Yeah, there was a contract with the city.
I can just go ahead and.
Sorry, it was a contract with the city, and then they just decided they didn't want to deal with anyone that would have that kind of discrimination, and then they fought it, and then they lost. But yeah, 100%. But thank you for the context. Pixie, if you have anything you want to add. If you're talking, we can't hear you.
So Supreme Court justices do have to give a full legal opinion on these things, and these documents are out there, rather than just conspiring about partisanism, which doesn't seem to exist in the data. But if you do want an alternative to Supreme Court, an alternative to packing the court, which would just continue to flip and expand based on whoever's president at the time, is one idea, I believe, put forward by the Harvard Law Review, to abolish the Supreme Court and go down to the next level, which I believe is like the circuit courts. And just every time there's a case that would be Supreme Court worthy, just select a random sample of those justices to basically make like a random panel each time to statistically control for bias.
I disagree that packing the courts necessarily means it flips every single time. That's a talking point that said, but like you'd have to have the political will to do that, right? To change the courts again and again and again, right? And you'd have to have the legislative ability to do that, approve your nominations. You'd have to have support to make that happen. So if it happened under one president, right, it doesn't necessarily mean that the next president will have the will or the desire or the ability to do that. So I disagree that that simply is an unworkable solution as to expand the courts. I mean, like, the number isn't fixed. You can make it whatever number you want. You can even massively expand it. That's another idea. It's not just like, oh, we'll put 5 on here, right, and we'll make it liberal or whatever, right? But like actually to massively expand the floor, like putting dozens on, and then rotate the judges. That's one solution that people have been talking about.
Why wouldn't they have the political will to do that, though?
Because they would have other priorities that the Supreme Court at that point maybe would not be a priority, or or that they're not looking to have that uphill fight. So, okay, Guy.
I just wanted to say, there's no open atheists on the Supreme Court as far as I know, or around non-believers. Everyone's like has some religion that they profess to believe in or whatever. I think that's an important thing to say because that would be a whole other panel. I like subscribe to the newsletter of some like humanist thing where I don't remember what they said. I think they said about this case that they were like, what they said about it in their email to me was like, oh, was this a narrow ruling? Fortunately, but even so, like, as far as I understand, the precedent is just very in favor of like protecting religious institutions, not like a theocracy or something, but just I'm just gonna say, like, if you're like an atheist or you're not religious, you might think, like I do, that the Supreme Court and precedent is like gives way too much like rights to religious institutions versus individual rights, and like that's what I did. I definitely think that, but that's a whole other panel. I have to like prepare on that because like it's just different. Like there's no atheists on the Supreme Court. Like I think that church and state has been really chipped away at slowly, like the separation between them in a way that makes me uncomfortable as an atheist. But like that's just, we're a small group. Many other people might not have a problem with it, but I do. I have a problem with like how much liberty is granted to like religious institutions.
Yeah,
I mean,
and
70% of America is religious in some capacity. I don't think there's anything in the Constitution that says that you have to be non-religious to just don't enforce your values, right?
sorry, do you want to get Guy to respond to that, or?
All right, that's a whole other panel. I don't know what to say. Like maybe the vast majority of people are like, oh, maybe this is not a problem, but for many of us who are not religious, it is a fucking problem to be like granting any special. I don't want to say special, but like that. I think that individual rights should take very much precedent over like anything with religious institutions. But that's just a whole other thing.
Yeah, we don't have to go down that right. But to respond to something else, Pixie, that you had said, you're talking about the decisions that they made, the legal decisions. But one, that's exactly true. Yes, they do have legal decisions, and they have the reasonings as to why they do things, right? But that's exactly when they're being nominated, that's what everyone looks at, right? And so when there's a fight, and when people bring up objections for the Supreme Court nominees, they're looking at their past legal opinions. Both, if they were previously a judge, they don't necessarily have to be the ones they've made there, or just like legal scholarship, right? Legal papers that they have. Like, well, we're looking for a person who's going to rule this way, right? Or I'm part of the minority party here, and I'm saying like this is unacceptable because you've had that opinion in the past. You've made it clear this is your opinion there, right? And so you're going to rule that way. It's likely that you'll rule this way, when put in place. Now it's not a guarantee because people do break up from their past decisions all the time. That's the thing that happens, true. But that's what they look to, and that's why it's so high stakes. Do you agree?
Yeah, but they still, regardless, have to, their opinion, what they can do, is restricted by what is a valid interpretation of the rules. And if you have a problem with that, you have to either get more judges with different, like, backed up opinions, or just change the rules. And that's why decisions like Bostock are effective, because no matter who is in power, like, you can't really do anything about that.
Sorry, go please. Sorry, I thought you were done. Please finish.
Yeah. No, it's just solid logic based on precedent.
Who decides what is valid?
What?
Who decide? You said they have to have their rulings have to be based on some sort of valid interpretation of the law. If I'm correct, if I'm quoting you correctly. That's the case. Then who decides what is valid?
Judges who give
the judges
opinions.
themselves, right? Yeah. So my decision is valid. You may disagree, but my decision is valid. I'm on the Supreme Court, so of course my decision is valid. So I'm saying they themselves may decide what is valid. So it's not like there is anything putting a check on them, on their opinions.
Do you have any evidence of this?
Hold on.
Being a thing.
What? That there is no check on the Supreme on judges?
That they're making clearly illegal rulings and things,
I didn't
and
say
they're
that.
just like getting away with it. No one's trying to stop them or call it out.
That's not what I said. That's not what I said.
Well, you're saying they could.
No, I'm saying that you're saying, well, quote unquote valid, right? Which you didn't say was illegal or illegal. I'm saying that like they decide what is a valid interpretation of the Constitution, right? Like I think that their originalism isn't valid, right? I think they're it's conveniently applied, it seems. Which is a thing that conservatives are all talking about, like like originalism within the Constitution, right? But that doesn't mean But that's my opinion, right? This is the opinion of other legal scholars, right? Liberalism is BS, right? But you're not on the courts. The people on the courts who are saying, "Oh no, this is valid," and so this is how we're interpreting the law, and this is how you should interpret the law, right?
Just let someone else answer. I have a lot to say, I'm sure.
Okay, well, we'd love to hear it. Let's go to Zonia and Gaia and Maura.
They had their hands up before me. I think Neo.
No, I'm trying to
like
like get people who haven't talked before. So Zonia, please.
Yeah. So, I mean, they are the uppermost tier of our judicial system. So there is nothing above them to decide whether or not the decisions that they're making are quote valid, right? So the decision that they make, you're obviously going to have they're going to write up and present on their decision, and when there's a dissenting opinion, they're going to write up their dissenting opinion, and they can put it out there. But they will put it out there, but there's not a they're the upper tier. So once they've made the decision, that's the decision. Now, whether or not it becomes legal precedent depends on the decision, and but no matter what, they're humans. So unless we replace them with robots, replace them with artificial intelligence with very strict controls, their own biases are going to come into how they interpret certain things. And no matter how they write that out, they're going to make certain things are going to be interpreted certain ways based on their own bias. There's no way to avoid that. So if you do, there's a whole reason why presidents try and stack the court with judges that fit within their their model of thinking, right? That's why they say they stack it with conservative judges or stack it with liberal judges, etc. That's just the way it works. Nixon tried to stack it with, he did stack it with pro corporate, pro business people. So he had a reason for doing that. It wasn't because it wouldn't affect the outcome of decisions. It was because it would affect the outcome of decisions. If they were completely unbiased in their decision making, why would presidents go out of their way to stack the court? Right?
Okay, let's have Gaia and then Maura.
Okay, so I am not a lawyer. I don't keep up on legalism. I don't keep that up that much on legal stuff, but I do know Heller pretty well. I do know that Supreme Court decision that was like, oh, the Second Amendment is the individual right to own a gun. All of a sudden, I mean, I'm not saying that it came from nowhere. It was actually what I was just saying before. The right spent a lot of money, like building the legal infrastructure to make this happen, like decades and decades and decades. Like the lower courts, and then finally the Supreme Court was like, oh, even from when we started being whenever we had our first constitution, like that's not the first constitution. Sorry, when we had the Constitution, there was the Articles of Confederation before. But when they were like, ever since there was the Constitution binding, whatever, until 2008, there was not, the Supreme Court did not recognize an individual right to own a gun. Like that. So I would encourage people to look into Heller and to see like, oh, all of a sudden they recognize this right. It wasn't precedent from the Supreme Court. I just want to know, it doesn't have to be like. And I was just saying, I don't expect the Supreme Court to be throwing precedent out left and right or making up random things. Like they very carefully have this whole legal infrastructure. I've read about it. Like there's definitely like a whole legal infrastructure they built. Like law schools that cater to the rights to get their pipelines into lower courts and this whole infrastructure. So anyway, so that's just what I would say. Heller is a good example of that. It wasn't just like, oh, we're just building. They created a precedent. They didn't. Or at least from themselves.
Maria, please.
Okay, so what I was going to say, basically, the way that the Supreme Court is supposed to work in general is that they interpret past laws and take those into account. They interpret things against the Constitution and see if things are unconstitutional. They have all of these different things that they're supposed to do. And of course, they're human. They're going to err on the side of judgment, but generally, they need to have a pretty damn good reason as to why they made a specific decision or not. Now, I'm still like again, I still want to know like if the Trump stacked court, because I'm not even going to disagree that Trump stacked the court. Like we all know that Trump did this. This is like, why did they rule that sex equals gender identity? Even in the first case when they said, oh well, this hasn't been tested, yada yada yada. The second case, when it came to schools not allowing people who do not identify with the gender that they were assigned at birth to like, okay, the second case that was litigated last month was literally, oh, you're not allowed to tell children who identify differently based off of the fact that sex, as defined in the Civil Rights Act, as we defined it previously, means gender identity. So if somebody identifies differently, they're allowed to use the bathroom that they identified as. So if there's some like grand like aha moment or some like anime villain twist where they're going to like pull like an Uno reverse card or something, like when is this going to happen is what I'm asking. Because like when it comes to the Fourth Amendment, I don't see them overturning precedents that would legally overturn strip searches against people's consent or without probable cause. I don't see them overturning anything that has to do with drug sniffing dogs. And again, we have to remember that like even when it came to guns, yeah, Heller was really cool for the District of Columbia, but it was specifically for almost the District of Columbia because they were the only place that didn't have a specific gun law on the charter. When it comes to the Constitution, states can have their own interpretations of the Constitution so long as it does not clash with the Constitution. And we also have to remember that White v. Texas ruled that the Articles of Confederation are still legally binding common law in the United States. So I'm sorry. I have a really splitting headache here.
Okay.
It's like right down the head, and his name's Gorsuch.
Okay. So, the answer to your question is the one that I've been trying to say the entire time, right? Is that while these people obviously have a partisan bent to them, or else again, like what would be the point of fighting for them, right? But it doesn't mean
Also-
that doesn't mean that they're partisan bots, right? These people aren't robots, right? And there could be other overriding decisions, or sorry, priorities within the case, right? A nuance within the case that says, well, okay, yeah, this is something that I'm going to rule in this favor because of this specific reason, all right? This other constitutional priority. So, and then you brought up, I'm sorry, like something about the bomb sniffing dogs or drug sniffing dogs, right?
Yeah.
Like the right to privacy, and you're relating that to the right to privacy, correct?
Yeah.
Well, the conservatives are all
was-
about that, like the right to privacy, especially from the government. I'm not surprised. I'd be shocked if they didn't rule in favor of that. Right? That's not a strictly liberal consideration, right? A lot of people want protection from the government, and certainly conservatives do. They talk about it all the time. So like that doesn't necessarily move me one or the other. My point is that once again, right? Like yes, we have these two cases. This is my entire point. I don't know why I'm getting so much pushback on it. That we have these two cases. Only simply don't rely on the courts as your path to salvation, and that they could very easily disappoint you. And that like it actually does matter who is on the Supreme Court, because if it didn't, why would we fight about it? If it was just balls and strikes, if they weren't partisan at all, right? If it was not all partisan institution, then there's nothing to fight about. Then just put whoever is the most quote unquote qualified, whatever that means, on the bench, right?
Yeah.
All right. Oh, well, okay. We're finding agreement. Pixie, if you want to say last words on this, I'll give you a final and then we'll move on to the next topic. So, final word, please.
Supreme Court justices can be impeached.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. That was interesting.
I'd
Sorry.
I'd also like to mention
Oh,
I
okay.
posted a link that's a Stanford analysis of bias since 1791 in the Supreme Court in terms of decision making. So anybody who wants to look at that in their spare time, also post it in your Twitch if the bot doesn't boot me for doing it.
No, it's fine. No, it's fine. Yeah. You can post links there. Go ahead. Okay.
I just
Yeah, go ahead. You want to say something? Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to say something really quick that when it comes to this issue of like Supreme Court justices somehow just ignoring the law, ignoring precedent, and just doing what they want, in a partisan way, it just seems like it just doesn't really happen. And it feels like on the same tier, it's like when conservatives really are worried about like mail-in ballots and how they're like all going to be fraud. It's like, yeah, like maybe it could be, maybe, but like it just doesn't happen,
No.
right? Or like, yeah.
The argument wasn't that they will ignore precedent to make these decisions. It's never the argument. I've never said that. Never. I don't know if anyone else did. Someone else might have made that argument. Then in that case, okay. That wasn't the argument I was making at all. Is that you can use precedents in a way it says that you're right and the other person is wrong, or the other side is wrong. Right? Like that's what happens. If precedent was so simple as to be black and white, right? Well, then there wouldn't be much of a question here, right? There wouldn't be all these legal battles, right? These scholars like writing competing papers on what precedent actually means, right? We can understand that. So like you can look at the same thing, the same precedent, the same legal case, and draw wildly different conclusions as to what that means and how that should be applied in the future. So you can use, again, a quote unquote valid reasoning to reach a conclusion that you find favorable, right? Like you using precedent, not throwing that out. You don't have to do that at all, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So we can move on to the next topic. To my audience, if you have just found this channel, then we have these conversations all the time. Please hit that follow button, make sure notification bell is on, so you know when we're going live. We do this 6 days a week. Don't want you to miss out. We have these conversations all the time with interesting individuals. And I like the disagreement we had there. It was actually really interesting. I didn't expect that we would land on that. That was not all what I came to talk about, but yeah, that's fun. Let's go to topic 2. On the political right, we've seen the power of a focused group of individuals who promote and defend a single issue, such as gun rights or being anti-abortion. However, the danger of this strategy is voting in candidates who might otherwise be against the priorities you stand for. But is that trade-off worth it? Should the left, and feminists more specifically, be single-issue voting to get their agendas passed? So yeah, we know on the right that there is, and not just on the right. I mean, I guess I love that happens too. But like, I think the clearest examples on the right, gun rights and anti-abortion, and the progress has been made simply by a small group of individuals who are focused and saying, like, this is where I stand, right? And as long as you stand with me on this one issue, then you have my vote. That small group of people can move mountains within our political system as it stands. And so, should the people on the left adopt this movement, right? Like on environmentalism, for instance, right? Like if you don't stand with us for climate change, for whatever climate change reforms we're trying to push, then you don't get my vote. It's just, I don't care what else that we may agree on, you're not going to get my vote if you don't stand with me on this issue. So yeah, Pixie? If you're talking, we can't. Go ahead. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. I mean, I think the most forward public example of this is probably in recent American history. The progressive movement led by Bernie Sanders' neglect of race issues in favor of class issues, which didn't work. So yeah, no, intersectionalism or bust.
Intersectionalism or bust. Okay, let's go to Siren.
I have a study on this. I'll link.
Hello. Sorry I didn't talk much that last one. That was kind of out of my wheelhouse. But I think on this topic we are seeing it more and more often. of the focusing of one issue, like Black Lives Matter. I would say police reform, healthcare, um, and things like that. I I don't see how it's harmful to do that. And I guess that's all I have to say.
Sonia?
Yeah, so this is an interesting topic. I think single issue voting has some serious problems. It causes a lot of very it affects primarily people who don't have very strong political acumen or the ability, strong political literacy, and it creates a lot of um, narrowly focused and oft ignorant approaches to electoral politics. And I think we can see that clearly manifest, for instance, in like the community surrounding certain very uh, loud single issue pundits and comedians. Their communities end up being pretty toxic and often neglect all the other issues that stem from well, having difficulty putting this in words that will convey what I'm trying to say. Uh, you, we have a lot of class reductionism that's happening right now, where people will often conflate um, various systemic issues that affect either race, ethnicity, gender, etc., with class. And so their answer is, well, if we could just get everybody to a certain level class wise by providing, certain um, certain taxpayer amenities and certain, guarantees, then all that stuff will go away. But that's not true, because we still see these issues manifest even with those who have managed to overcome certain class hurdles. And it's becoming a populism movement at this point. Single issue voting is kind of a populism thing. It's a little more than single issue. It's like, three core class specific issues that seem to be taking over and becoming populist. And it's particularly affecting and encompassing those who don't have very strong political literacy, who don't really understand how all these things work. And those individuals, unfortunately, are creating a populist movement that is not going to greatly improve the systemic issues that a lot of us deal with. For instance, trans women and people of color. And yeah, unfortunately, it's an easy message to sell people, and people buy into it easily due to that lack of political literacy and acumen.
Okay. Femboy? If you're talking, we can't hear
You're
you.
muted.
Yeah.
Single issue vote, like running a single issue campaign can be very powerful to get people riled up, but generally, just because of the nature of what you're doing, the fact that it's single issue, you won't really catch a wide array of people. You'll just get a really small, passionate part of the electorate. So I think it's not really useful when you're trying to win elections. In general, single issue voting just doesn't seem to make much sense, because you can tend to start ignoring other very important parts of politics, I guess, or the world, right? You can focus on, like, for example, all LGBT issues, but then like you completely put on the side climate issues, right? These two issues are both still very important, and they shouldn't like be sacrificed for one or another. We should probably find a good way to compromise and push both through. Yeah.
Thanks so much. Moria?
Yeah, I was going to say that this is a problem that affects both the left and the right when it comes to different things. If you're going to single issue vote, I have no problem if you're single issue voting when you're doing it in your state or if you're doing it in a local election, because oftentimes those are the places where single issues matter. Now, on the left, generally we see people pushing for single issues when it comes for like med for all. Like, I don't think that Pre Joe Joy or whatever the bad faith whatever the former dipshit that hosts Bad Faith name is.
You mean
I don't think
Joy Ann Reed? Is that what you meant? Is that what you mean?
Brianna Joy Gray.
Brianna
That's the
Joy
one
Brianna
she's
Joy
referring
Gray.
to.
Yeah.
Is that
Yeah.
what? Okay, I'm very confused. But Brianna
Yeah.
Joy Gray. Oh yeah, sure, go ahead.
Yeah. I don't think that I've once seen her fundamentally address any issue that's not from a very reductionist take. I don't think I've seen her address any issue not strictly from an accelerationist take. I don't think I've even seen her mention the fact that we should believe every single survivor unless if that survivor so happens to benefit their campaign. When it comes to Republicans, normally they vote for gun rights. Normally they vote for things that affect rural people more so than people that live in large cities. And that's just because we can see that there's a major shift in the electorate. The Republican Party, if we look at the way that it is moving and the way that districts have to be rezoned, like in Ohio, for example, it is becoming a much more rural party. It is not in any cities. It's not in any major, small towns like we saw in 2016. It's becoming the party of the farmers and the backwoods, so to speak. And I don't mean backwoods derogatory. So it makes sense that those people who generally are politically uneducated on certain things see a specific ad, get a flyer in the mail, and go, oh, this good, other person must be bad. So I think it comes down to the need for people like Amanda in your Discord, really great and amazing. Always really awesome when it comes to reaching out and talking about things and talking about how to canvas and talking about how to reach different voters. So it's an issue of how do we deal with the fact that people are on one party voting from a place of fear for one specific right, and the other party seems to be voting from a place of I don't care if we get this, then suddenly everything will just roll into place because everybody will be equal under one specific set of laws. Which, in general, I mean, I think that both ideas are functionally stupid. You should vote for you shouldn't vote just straight Democrat down the line. You shouldn't just vote straight Republican down the line. You should vote for somebody who has the best policies that they're proposing, and that's my thing. That's the ultimate centrist grilled take.
Okay, Gaia.
Apologies for having my hand up. I forgot we were doing the intro, the thing first. Anyway, I'm a big believer in coalitional politics. Before I say that, I want to thank Neil Morai. Sorry if I'm missing Morai because I came late.
It's alright.
But I just wanted to say yes, Brianna Joy Gray is terrible. Terrible. I was so disappointed when Bernie Sanders hired her. I'm an anti-class reductionist socialist. Yes, that's a thing. Actually, that's the right way to do socialism, but that's getting into a whole theory thing. But like, I just want to say, yes, she's awful. Actually, there's a tweet from her that I have retweeted many times of just proving people that she said that Brianna Joy Gray has said there are too many non-white people in the Democratic Party. She said that. She said there were not enough white people in the Democratic Party. When you look at the stats, the percentage of whites in the Democratic Party largely matches the percentage of like the whites in the US. Like it's so similar. It's very representative, actually. But anyway, now that I'm done with my anti-Brianna Joy Gray rant, I'm a big believer in coalitional politics. Like, if you look at this, is one of those things where, like, I think if people participate in groups and know what it's like to be in a real life group and like do things, understand the power of this. Whereas, like, I don't know, these single issue voters on the left, or just people who like, I don't know, we live in an individualist society in the U.S. Like, they just don't understand how to work with people and how people are like changed and how their minds are made up, because pretty much everyone that works at least in a real life left, even far left group, they understand this. You won't see like even tankies understand this. Even like bizarre like Maoists and Marxist Leninists understand that you have to like work on multiple issues, and that you get when you work with people on different issues, then you make friendships or at least relationships, and they're more willing to hear you out on what you're interested in. And that's how politics works. It's something that I don't know. Maybe people don't get it when they don't hang out, they don't talk to other people in real life that much. They're just like in their online silo. I don't know, but big believer in coalitional politics here.
Okay, yeah. All right, so I'll open to the panel, please. Zanya, please.
I feel
Yeah,
like we all
so-
generally agree, right?
Yeah, I
Oh.
think we kind of do, and that's one of the things I was going to say. Is like it seems like we're all pretty much on the same page here. I don't know, maybe like I kind of felt like speaking a little bit on the effects of the populism bred out of single issue voting and the kind of ignorance around it. Like I think we're all pretty much well aware of Jimmy Dore's audience and the effect that it's had, the negative effect that it's had on a lot of people. The kind of what would you call that? Like the vesicant coming out of the community, the way in which, because the lack of political literacy causes a lot of people who are major door stands to go and just attack and bully people, because from their perspective, the fact that the people that they voted for didn't do the kind of things that they wanted them to do, and because they're not observing, because they're not seeing the nuance and how these political issues play out and how to tactically take them to the floor in the Senate, they're getting really aggressively angry with the people that they voted for, to a point where they're just like the language and the behavior in that group is almost like a burn it down kind of behavior. And that kind of, the combination of the ignorance, the lack of political acumen, the obsessiveness with a single issue, and the anger, it's all kind of creating something that is easy to manipulate, right? Like a lot of people were manipulated into supporting, whether or not we truly agree with Trump on some issues or others. A lot of people with a very similar lack of political acumen and anger and focused on very specific single issues were manipulated into voting for Trump. And and this has happened with many other political candidates, and they take advantage of that. They take advantage of the ignorance, they take advantage of the lack of political understanding, and take advantage of the anger and the focus on the single issue, and lure you into voting for them. And it turns out they're a pretty terrible candidate. So it's something that is growing. It's becoming more of a problem. We're seeing more of that burn it down kind of mentality. And there are politicians that are smart enough to take advantage of that. And I think we're seeing more and more of a trend toward that with this kind of stuff. And it's becoming populism, unfortunately.
Gaia, and then Maths.
Yeah, I just want to give a real life example of like where this rubber meets the road. Like, I don't know, that's the right idiom. I'm sorry. But hey, like I want to give a really good example. Like a good example is like a couple years back, the governor of Louisiana, I forget his name. Anyway, he was a Democrat, but he's an anti-abortion Democrat. So like I'm very, very, very pro-choice. Like super like as much as you can be, like to not compromise on that. I'm very as much like, I'm like that's primary in the primaries, do not ever vote for like, an anti-abortion Democrat. But anyway, but so like I remember when that happened and people were saying, oh, like people were arguing about it. Should like the national level groups were like, should we give money to this, Louisiana Democrat because it would do good? And what ended up happening was because of him. Yeah, I don't like his abortion stance, but because of him, they were able to pass. I think Louisiana might be the only deep south state that has like a Medicaid expansion still. I think other southern states, a few other southern states now have also expanded Medicaid, but like that did a lot of good, like because they were able to elect, Louisiana Democratic governor, they were able to at least not like in other places, like even if they have passed, like I think there have been other Republican-run states where they have on the ballot initiative front like passed Medicaid expansion, but they've had like Republican governors or Republican legislatures like sabotage it. Just like a concrete good of like where you really have to influence where you can, and I would especially tell people if you're like feel super passionately about something, the primaries are where to do that. But not to just be like, I just can't imagine being like, well, I don't like this guy's abortion stance, so I'm just gonna like throw Louisiana to the Republicans. So it just seems extremely self-defeating, like, and I'm very like, I'm so pro-abortion rights when Argentina like legalized abortion like at the end of last year. had a toast. Like, I have pictures of myself having toast, drinking alcohol, being like, finally, justice, the first major domino in Latin America. We're gonna do this. Like, I'm very committed to that cause, but like, you still have to be a bit pragmatic. You can't just be like, oh, I didn't get this one thing that's really important to me, so let me just throw this whole area to like Republicans.
Go ahead.
I'm still waiting.
No, you go ahead, finish your point, and then we'll go to Mass.
Oh, I'm still waiting on Vietnam to legalize gay marriage. In general, I was gonna say this, like when it comes to single issue voters, like there were people that voted Mike Pence over Tim Kaine, and then there were a lot of Democrats that voted for Hillary simply because Tim Kaine personally opposed abortion, but wanted to make sure that it was governmentally protected. So really, what we need to acknowledge is that there's single issue voters when it comes to everything. Like we see it more frequently on the right because they're the loudest, but it's getting louder and louder on the left. If you look for the Medicare for all or the force the vote people, fundamentally they wanted to ruin the careers of the squad or ruin any political capital they had on a vote that wouldn't have passed. So we see one side that's voting specifically because, oh, I want to protect my guns. I don't want to have the government walking around taking away my guns, doing gun buybacks like they do in California, all this other stuff. And then the other side is either we get everybody to force the vote on Nancy Pelosi and then force a public option, or we literally just burn it all down and start over again with a completely new set of Democrats that are hand chosen by somebody who praised Steve Bannon. So I think that it's an issue on both sides. And when it comes to single issue voting is just something that I can't wrap my head around. I could understand if you're in the backwoods of like Kentucky and you're super brainwashed into thinking that the government will do a buyback in Kentucky, then you're probably going to vote for somebody that says that they're not. But other than that, I can't think of a single issue why you would.
Mass.
So back to what Zonia was saying. Although we have seen like a definite rise in like this far left populism, like very class based, Medicare for all, blah blah blah, it hasn't really been showing any effects yet, which is probably good. I'm worried of how it'll affect the future elections, but from what it seems, most of the people who are getting wrapped in on all of this weren't voters in the first place or are probably too young to vote. And for the future, like at least let's hope that like all the Bernie or busters wash out with the Trumpies who think every election is stolen. So let's hope those even each other out and we get a wash.
So
Yeah.
I don't. And I'll go to you, Sonia. I don't understand. Like, I don't know. It seems like there's a lot of power in this, right? Now there are risks, but in single issue voting, I mean, the formula cannot be denied. Right? Like looking at the NRA and what they had managed to accomplish, right? Saying that, well, this is the one thing, this is matters, right? Like you got to defend your Second Amendment, right? And like the things that have come out of that group, and then there's also even people even farther right than the NRA. So like there's the NRA and where their stance is, and there those who are even farther, more extreme than the NRA. But what has come out of that level of advocacy is just literally undeniable in terms of its effect on public policy, right? Literally in textbooks, they talk about how effective the NRA. Like, oh, this is how you do it. Like, if you want to get an issue passed, right? Well, then a very small portion of the population, and it's a very, very small portion of the population, can move mountains easily. Right. Simply like when there is a like a meeting in either Washington or within a state capital, right? Talking about, hey, like these guns is getting a little crazy with these deaths. Hey, let's consider these restrictions, these very reasonable restrictions. Their members are there, The rest of you aren't there, right? I'm not there, but they're there. They're absolutely there, and their voices are heard every single time, right? And they're saying, on this issue, I'm going to make sure you are not elected. Now, if you gather up all our members combined, we don't have enough to actually turn like a national election, but we can apply pressure here in strategic areas, and we can sway, or at the very least, we can make you think that we swayed everything, right? Because that's another thing, right? Simply having them there, like having them in a room, right, where you're discussing policy, like proposing it to the public. I want to hear what the public has to say about this, right? And then having a vocal minority saying, no way, no on this. It's not happening. Yelling it down. Yeah, that intimidates politicians. It happens all the time. So, like, I don't see why everyone seems to be pretty set on on this not working, or this not being a good idea. So, Zonia sorry. You can respond, and then we'll go to Zonia, and then we'll go to Sarah.
I was just going to say, I feel like the main difference there is that Republicans cater to a very specific group, a very small yet powerful group, right? Straight, white, not generally wealthy, like from both sides of the economic ladder, white, all that stuff, right? You're kind of stereotypical American, right? While Democrats try to appeal to all types of people, right? They white, POCs, gay, all LGBT, and there are so many interests that are inside the Democratic Party, so it can be really hard to get that unified power. So, right, this is what you saw in the primary, right? This election.
Yeah, but this is not so. I think you're getting two things mixed up, right? The Democratic Party and the left, right? Those two things aren't synonymous. We understand that. I'm saying that, and I believe that's how I wrote it. And if I did wrote it incorrectly, then I apologize. But when I wrote this question on this topic, I was talking about specifically how the people on the left should act, right? And the point of this single issue advocacy is not necessarily to get others on your side. It's to get legislation passed. And again, as the NRA shows, you don't have to get the nation on your side to get legislation passed, right? As long as you have that vocal minority. The point isn't to get many people on your side. Just get the most hardcore people on your side, and whatever that issue is. So you don't have to have people join you, right? That's not the point. The point is to scare politicians, right? To harass them, or whatever it is, right? Make them know that you will be heard on this issue, and you know exactly how. There's no guessing. You know exactly how we're going to vote, and we'll get other people. We're going to make sure that other people know that we're voting this way, right? So like the public knows that this is an important issue. So yeah, let's go to Zonia and then Saren. And I'm not sure. Sorry, I'm not sure, Pixie, if your eyes are twinkling. So if they are, then we'll go to you. Okay, sorry, I don't mean to skip you. Zonia.
Okay, so generally speaking, when we talk about single issue voting, we're talking about the individual voter being obsessed with a single issue, and that's what they care about, and they're, and that's the one thing they're going to focus on. Usually, it's a wedge issue, right? But in more recent days, it's been like UBI and Medicare for All, et cetera, which are starting to become wedge issues in the last 2 years. But the NRA is not really a good example of this. There are many different organizations that focus on one issue, but the NRA is a 501c4 that gets money from a lot of individuals in the organization as well as corporations, and they funnel that into the lobby as well as they motivate its members to vote a certain way. But the individuals that are members of the NRA, like myself, for instance, have been an NRA Life member since the mid-90s, is comprised of many different people, some of which are single issue voters. I've known many people in the NRA who are just like, yeah, all I care about is the Second Amendment, but there's plenty of people in there that are like, oh, I care about all this whole list of things, right? So the NRA is not a good example of that. If you're talking about the lobby, well, that's something else. It's lobbying. So we need to be clear on the terms. If we're talking about single issue voting, you're talking about individuals who are obsessed with one single issue. That's the only thing they care about, and they're going to do absolutely everything they can. All their voting is going to go toward that one issue. And it is an effective way to motivate people because it's usually based on some very emotionally loaded controversial thing, right? And they want to get it done. And so we see that, for instance, with the Door fans focused on M4A and the what's it called? Brianna Joy Gray's thing, Bad Faith, right? You know, the audiences are very, very focused on one thing, M4A, and they're very aggressive about it, right? So that's single issue voting. And that is the problem I have with single issue voting is that it creates this it's usually taking advantage, first of all, of people who are not very politically literate. They don't really understand very much about the general, the workings and mechanics of politics and electoral politics, etc. And um, and and using their lack of understanding that to get them to focus on just one issue, and they become very motivated on it and very obsessed with it, and no matter what, whether or not it's a feasible thing at the time, they're going to aggressively push everybody to go for it. So we need to be specific about the language here, between the difference between lobby, the lobby that is and the nonprofits that raise money, to pay for the attorneys and such, and fund the lobby, as well as offer incentives to representatives to vote a certain way, versus individual voters that are single issue voters who then cohort and form these very big populist movements these days. It's very different things. So I still would say no, I don't think we should be focused on single issue moving forward, because there's just too much stuff that needs to be acted on, and a lot of single issues, no matter how hard you push on them, require various steps to get to a certain point where they become feasible, right? And we've seen that, for instance, with M4A.
So
Now, I think advocacy, like taking advantage of people who are focused on a particular issue and getting them to work together as a group, is effective. And I think it's most effective at the local level, state or local. As Neil Morai pointed out, it's much more effective at the local level, because there are often fewer issues that are as divisive and controversial, and more people tend to agree with each other because they're affected by the issue more directly. And bringing that up to national electoral politics, it becomes just more of a fervor where you can manipulate people, because usually that's not the way our political machinery works at the national level.
of the order will be Saren, Pixie, and then more. I'm sorry. Moira. Moira? What is the name again? I'm sorry. I've been pronouncing it different literally every single time.
It's all right. Everybody does. It's Morai.
Morai. I'm sorry. I'm going to endeavor to do better.
Right.
That's not on purpose.
It's all right. Like legit, everybody does it.
Morai. No, I should be better. So Morai. I'm gonna try to do better. Okay. To Zonia. I disagree that the NRA is not it's definitely the perfect example of this, right? The fact that the club itself, right? The NRA is like many things, right? But the fact that, like, in terms of membership, like, they don't say, like, well, to be a member, like, is this the only thing you care about, right? Check the box or you can't get in, right? The fact that that's not the case doesn't mean that it isn't that the fact that it motivates, that organization motivates 2A voters, right, to act the way that they do. That doesn't nullify that there are other people in the organization who have other priorities, right? The whole point is that the NRA has been good at pushing its votors, pushing a certain segment of its members to act on its policy recommendations. Like that's it, right? If there are other people who have other opinions, I'm sure that's like literally every organization. That's like, you'll never find a pure ideological organization, right?
Yeah, but
you're sorry. Go ahead, please. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, but that's not the definition of single issue voting. That would be a single issue non-political nonprofit, right?
It doesn't have to be a nonprofit. It doesn't have to be an organization that does that.
But yeah, I mean, you could just start like a 501c4 whose only goal is to get M4A. There are probably some out there. I don't know. I'd need to look at it, but obviously not as popular as the NRA, right? And not as big, not as effective. But yeah, I mean, at least everything I've known about single issue voting, that's not what I've heard. Maybe the terms are a little bit, evolving these days, which terms always do, right? So I may be wrong about this. But I always thought of single issue voting as the individual who isn't very, there's not a lot they care about. They care about one issue. And so everybody they vote for, it's based on that issue, right? So I wouldn't have considered the NRA because it's.
So this is what I'm saying.
I mean,
but like, yeah, it's motivating individuals
right?
to vote in a single issue, like those who care about Second Amendment. I'm not sure if this is worth arguing about. It's like, I don't think it's a big of a deal. But the point is that it's motivating those issues. Like, so you're part of the NRA, right? You're obviously not a single issue voter. Okay, great, right? But then there are others, like you said, who are, right? Those are single issue voters, and the NRA is helping motivate that particular cohort. Like that's all I mean, right? Yeah. And it doesn't necessarily matter if the organization itself does other stuff, right? I'm just saying that should individuals, right, team up together to push these priorities. And so someone else said, well, there's too many different priorities, right, on the left. Well, but that's not the point, right? Like, it wouldn't be, obviously the left altogether could not do this, right? And that wouldn't make sense. But like, go ahead, please.
Well, quick thing then. So if that's the case, I misread the question or misunderstood the question. So yeah, I would advocate for that. Then I think that's very important. I was thinking of something else entirely. So in my mind, I was thinking of the single issue voter. As opposed to, the political nonprofits and such in the lobby, as well as the motivational aspect, organizing people. I do think that's important. I had never before considered that to be single issue voting. I could be wrong about this. So, yeah, I mean, then I would totally agree with you on that. In that case, I do think that's a good thing. So I guess we do agree on this.
I'll stop talking until in case I convince you out of it. So with you, Sonia.
Yeah, I was envisioning something else entirely. So I'm sorry.
Oh, no problem. I may have written it the question unclear. So okay, let's go to Saren, then Pixie, then Morai, and Gaia, please.
I think I was gonna say I agree with you, Prime. I mean, I don't think, and I guess I kind of said this in the opening. I don't think there's a problem with someone focusing on one issue, and then like once like a voter is interested in that, it's like it opens it up. And I think someone brought up Bernie earlier. I didn't like. I don't think he's a single issue candidate at all. But that's I guess that's another conversation. I mean, but like with Bernie, there was like the focus on healthcare and oh my gosh, it was so long ago I don't even remember. There was the focus on healthcare, right? And people also I think like free college, maybe free college, and people attach themselves to that one thing, and then it opens it up to so much more. And yeah.
Thanks so much. Pixie, I've been waiting quite a bit, so I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Sure. So it wasn't to say that Bernie is like a single issue candidate, but like relatively, that was the whole meme, right? This has been in several analyses since that he tried to focus mainly on economic inequality, things like Medicare for all, free college and stuff, things that appeal to like white working class and middle class people kind of at the expense. That was like his gambit, right? That if he could focus on class issues, he could take a huge chunk out of the Republican base and pull them in. And that was fair. That's a hypothesis. He tested it. It just didn't work. And it turns out that like the Democratic establishment Big Tent approach to be more inclusive to different, especially racial minority groups, like was just more solid overall. And that's just that. But I think this question is really about like, let's be honest here, like the online left, right? I mean, come on, like that. These are the spaces that we all know. What this is kind of like hinting at is, should people just go hard on like class issues and kind of focus that angle? And I think this is a huge problem we're seeing online, where you either get like the you get the anarchists or like the tankies, people who, and frankly, the tankies lately have been seeming pretty well spoken, better spoken than a lot of the other kind of more typical like post breadtube leftists we've seen. And I'm worried about a Nosbel vortex forming, and I really don't think it is statistically proven to work or ethically good to say like, let's just keep deprioritizing already invisible racial issues, issues of ability, issues of feminism in these spaces to focus more on class issues, which is frankly political suicide. I mean, like if you can start winning elections, I'm happy to support whoever, but it's not working, and I'm sorry. So intersectionalism all the way.
So I don't.
Oh,
Oops,
can I respond?
Go ahead, please. Go ahead.
I mean, economic inequality is a pretty big, like, broad issue, and also I think Bernie had a pretty big following from Hispanic or Latinos here, so not just like white middle class Americans.
So, Pixie, this question, when I wrote it, wasn't necessarily saying voting on class issues, right? Just saying that are a number of priorities, right? But whether we should, that would it be beneficial if members of the left, right? And that's very broad, right? There's many members who have many different priorities, but who it would be good if we had groups who are out there focusing on one issue, right? Because of like, would that be effective in moving the needle, right? And that could be any issue. It doesn't have to simply be a class-based issue, right? It could be anything under the sun that is a priority for the left. That we have people are passionate about that. So it could be like issues that are intersectional, right? That understand that there is a race element, a sex element, right, to these things. So like not necessarily class based. But why did you think it was? You brought it to the online left. Why did you think necessarily that was the focus? I just want to understand your thinking.
Because that's the big trend we've seen lately, and I am not sure what issue is worth having like we need to just focus on this issue that the Democratic establishment party is not on the right side of here. And like that's the one example I always see, like the Nosbols, the tankies are like, oh, the Democrats aren't our friends. Like I'm happy to hear any valid example, but I've been on the internet a long time and I haven't seen one.
So
one quick thing. So I'm just doing a little reading up on it, and I've linked it in the group. I think the confusion was around the single issue voting versus single issue groups. And I see what you're saying now. You're talking about like groups that will motivate people based on a single issue, not specifically the voters being just simply dedicated to one single issue. And I think that's an important thing to clear up, because I think we've got plenty of examples of that on like, left and right, but it's primarily right-wing groups do that much more effectively, correct? That's sort of what you're saying for this, Prime?
So what exactly is the question? I'm sorry.
I'm trying to clarify. It's hard to engage with this if we don't understand what we're talking about, right? So we've already had a few people interject, and we're kind of going in weird directions, and it seems like we're unclear. So I just want to clarify. So what you're asking is, should we be doing more of what, like, for instance, the NRA does, or Focus on the Family does, or one of those, where you drive lots of different voters and, sort of are the center point on providing them information and driving them to the polls and driving them to reach out to their representatives to force their representatives to accomplish that one thing. You're not advocating for, like, the individual voter to getting the individual voter to just be obsessed with only one thing. Because typically the big argument in politics and punditry these days is that single issue voting, which is like the single issue voter, is a problem because it's effectively getting one person obsessed with one thing and they don't understand how politics actually works. And so that's the only thing that they care about, which is, it's a pretty big problem these days, versus being a group that finds people interested in certain things and motivates them to go and make the change, but isn't necessarily just trying to get everybody to be a single issue voter. It's like to push them for this thing at this point in time, like kind of what the NRA does. So you get I get notified, for instance, by the NRA that, hey, there's this legislation in California that's passing. It's going to chip away at your gun rights. And then I go and I look at it, and then I choose whether or not I need to push against it and call my representatives. But there's much more going on beyond that. So I think that was the confusion. I've been reading up on it on Wikipedia now. So that's what you're talking about, right?
Yeah. So I see what you're trying to say. I would say the former with these groups. Okay, if that clears things up, where we have groups that are pushing these things, that people coming around that common cause, and this is their one focus. At least I think we're on the same page there. Yeah. So, like, okay. So I'll tackle what Pixie said. Pixie asked a question. I want to tackle that later on, but I want to get to everyone else who's waiting patiently. So let's go, Morai, Gaia, and then Maths. Morai, are you talking?
Sorry, I was talking to my chat real quick. I was going to say, real quick, when it comes to single issue voters, the number one block of single issue voters in the entirety of the United States isn't people who are gun voter, isn't people who vote on guns, isn't people who vote on abortion. The number one biggest block of single issue voter, not single group specified voters, are actually Cubans. Cubans will, no matter what, vote for any candidate who opposes Cuba. Again and again, we have seen this over and over and over and over again. We have seen that this is the block that the Republican literally sucks the toes of every time they go to Florida. So that's a single issue that we're going to have to work really hard to move people on, because there are so many old Cuban dudes in Florida just sitting there smoking cigars that aren't going to move their position on that. The other thing that I had to take question, like the other thing that I had like issues with, and it might just be the wording of the question, is that, like, should we as the left and feminists, where it's like I know a lot of feminists that are actually anti-abortion. So I don't know if anybody else has come across that, but there are pro-life feminists. I don't think that feminism strongly is on the left or the right, but yeah. And also in terms of like single issue voting, if you're on the left and like you didn't vote for Biden, like I'm sorry that the fact that we literally put $21.6 billion into housing homeless people and cutting poverty in half by 40% for children, it's not good enough yet. But yeah, I don't know. Sorry, my brain's fried.
No, Morai, you're making a lot of sense. Morai, in terms of that Cuban example, though, that's perfect. That I wish I had thought of that myself. Thank you. But both parties been to the world, so that wasn't just a Republican thing, right? Both parties.
Yeah, both both parties been to Cubans, especially Miami.
Ex-
They'll sit there and like burn a Cuban flag if it'll get votes.
Yeah, so this is an issue that is salient to quite the minority, right? They just happen to be in a very valuable state, right? And so because they're voting on this, and this is something that they've Bernie Sanders was, I'm not sure if it's fair criticism, but he was criticized that he showed nothing, something other than complete antagonism.
Yeah, he refused to bow to them.
Yeah. Something other than complete antagonism to Castro and the regime there, right? And that turned off those voters, and there's no way he was going to win that way, right? Because this one group of individuals had said, like, this is our stance, and this is like, and if you want any political traction in our era, in this state, you are going to vote with us, or there will be consequences, right? And the Democratic and Republican candidates all say, yes, sir, thank you, sir, right? Like, so I feel like that's a powerful strategy, when that happens. There are consequences to this strategy. I'm very making clear, right? There's very consequences to strategy, because the people who are most likely, I feel like those who are most likely to go along with those particular Cuban voters also didn't have a lot of their other economic priorities in mind, right? So that's like
Marco Rubio had zero economic policies that would have benefited the Cuban communities in Florida, but he was firmly against Obama's opening of trade with Cuba, and was firmly against normalizing relationships with Cuba, so he automatically secured that vote.
Yeah. Exactly. So let's go to Gaia and then Maths. And I'm not sure, Pixie, again, I don't know. I'm not trying to skip you, so I want to make sure. I'm just checking in with you to make sure if you have anything else to say. I want to make sure you can do so. Let's go to Gaia and Maths.
Sure, I'll go at the end of the line.
Sure. Gaia?
So I just want to, before I get to what I was going to say, the Florida Latino thing is very interesting. So, like, first of all, yes, I think Cubans are the largest Latino group in Florida, obviously, but they're not. There's a lot of other Latinos in Florida. I remember reading like about the 2018 Senate election in Florida, and complaints from like Florida Democrat, like local activists, being like Ben Nelson, I guess he was the senator that lost that race. They were saying like there are all these they were like, you're not going to persuade like the Cubans, okay? So 2020 is a little bit different, but they were like, you're not going to persuade the old Cubans. Like, there's all these persuadable, like, for example, Venezuelans. Like, Venezuela is a very important issue, but like they were like, they're not necessarily hostile to the Democratic Party, but they just didn't do a lot of outreach. They were like, basically, all these articles written about how like the Democratic Party did a really poor job of like building like support in the long run amongst persuadable Latinos in Florida, because like they're not the majority. I think Cubans are like the plurality, but they're not the majority. There's a lot of persuadable Latinos that they just didn't do the outreach to correctly. 2020 is interesting because I remember warning people, Bernie, when people were like, Bernie's going to like, I was like, Bernie's going to do, I saw the polls. I was like, Bernie's going to tank the primary in Florida. It's just no way. Maybe he'll be able to get past that, but he just did so badly there. I mean, there was so much propaganda against him. And I will also say there's a political, I've said this before. Like, I don't understand this theory of change where people think like we'll elect a socialist as president before we have socialists on like every city council and like as many Congress people, not just like 5 of them, and like, and we have to have socialists from the ground up. So it's really weird. People think, oh, we'll elect Bernie and then we can get everybody else. Because like there is a political cost to Bernie's a social democrat, okay? He's not actually like a Marxist or something. There's like a political cost to saying you're a socialist when you're not actually like a Marxist, and you don't have like you don't have like the grassroots level, like you don't have all these like network of like progressive like socialist activists. But so when I wanted to go back to Prime, what your original question was like, I think you first, when you were like, let's say what maybe on the local level, I don't know if we were talking about the federal level, but with like your single issue, I think you were calling it climate change, right? But even that's a perfect example of like how you cannot afford to do that. Like, of course, people should fight really, really hard, and I'm seeing some great groups that work really, really hard at like the state level on climate change and environment, but like, I don't know. When the UN report came out in 2018, right? They were like, we have 12 years to really turn this around, right? I don't know if we have a little bit more time now because the things slowed down during the pandemic, but like, when you have like such a short amount of time, you can't just be like, okay, the NRA strategy, it's like the NRA, or at least the gun rights lobby, whatever you want to call them, it took them like 50 years to get to where we are. Like their plan of like shifting the culture, that took a long time. It took a long time and a lot of money. We don't have 50 years for climate change. It's just another thing. You just have to go with the most effective strategy. Right now, I don't think that's single issue stuff. Like, for example, what I think of, I'm like, what is one of the major obstacles to like climate change legislation nationally? Let's mention, right? He's the moderate guy. Oh, these coal miners, they're actually not that huge part of, like, most workers in West Virginia do something else, right? But there's such a powerful political constituency. It's like, we have to do like the just transition thing. We have to like bribe them. We have to do something to get them on board. Like we have to deal with their economic issues. That's part of the plan. You can't just be like, oh, well, let's just like have a climate change plan without that. I mean, a lot of people get that. It's included now. But just like you have to do what you have to do. Like sometimes people will just buy in your coalition if you give them what they want. Like, you know, so that's what I would say about that.
But
Yeah.
single issue voting isn't about changing the culture. That's like, I mean, if it's great if it does, then hooray! you're farther ahead than you really need to be. The point is to shift the political landscape, right? And you do that by getting wins and taking credit for those wins, whether they're deserved or not. But if people perceive, and I'm just using the NRA for example, but there are other examples, right? But if they perceive that it was gun rights advocates, right, like that this candidate lost because they were on the wrong side of the gun issue, right? They crossed to a voters. Oh, then I'm gonna have to think twice. I might have to recalibrate. See, I didn't have much of an opinion on this before, right? As a potential politician, I didn't have much of an opinion on this before, but now, well, that person lost. Maybe that person lost because of them as well. All right, well, let me make my position a bit more nuanced here, where it wasn't before, right? So it's not about necessarily changing like the culture. The culture is irrelevant, right? It's irrelevant whether most women want to be able to control their own bodies, right? It's me as a not me, but as a anti-abortion voter, right? Your job is simply to scare politicians enough and change the environment, the political environment, and so that they'll vote vote with you, right? And then hopefully the culture will change afterwards. But that's really not my concern. Does that make sense, Gaio? Yeah.
So was that a question to me, or you want to respond?
No, if you don't want to respond, it's fine. I was wondering if what I said made sense at all.
I think no. I'm just. It makes. I'm glad that you have had your mind. You've thought about it. I feel like we did a good job. Then that's all I'm gonna say.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Femboy Mass.
So I feel like if we want to think of another recent example of single issue voting, we could think of the entire, basically, the entire idea of Trumpism, right? Right now, what we see in the Republican Party is a sharp divide between those who are pro-Trump and anti-Trump. I feel like, as everyone outside the party has seen, it's been really hurting their party. The fact that they've been casting out powerful members of the party just because they're not aligned on this one issue has been hurting them. And I'm worried that if we go down that route, we could suffer the same consequences where we could just bite ourselves in the foot because we're so focused on one issue and we lose control on every other scale, especially if the issue is unpopular, just like Trump is, right? That's what happened in Georgia. They went hard on the Trumpism issue and they lost because people in Georgia didn't like Trump.
We doesn't have to be all of the left. I want to make that very clear. The left can be focused on, I guess it's very confused, but like just groups, right? Who are focusing and making these pushes, right? And making progress. So the left doesn't have to fail collectively on anything. I'm just wondering if it's beneficial for this as a strategy, right? You'll never get the whole left. You'll never get the whole right. The right doesn't all agree on everything, right? There's many conservatives, big disagreements on that side as to how to push things along, right? But there are groups who are saying, like, I am not budging on anti-abortion. I am quote unquote pro-life. They're not, but I am pro-life, and this is what it is, right? Gun rights, whatever. But like, this is what the way it has to be. If you don't vote for us, right, there are going to be consequences. So, and those people are effective. Small portion of the right who cares like that. They've made great strides. So yeah, it doesn't have to be all of the left, right, or all of feminists, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just think, as we've seen with the more modern single issue voting, it can be very toxic, right? I mean, it can hurt the party from the inside, even if not everyone votes on it. Just like how the popularity of Trump is the minority, right? It's still hurting the Republican Party, right? I'm worried we might get into that.
Thank you. Let's go to Pixie, and then Zonia, you got your hand up, right?
So, besides, it might be more effective, just like algorithmically, to focus on specific targeted topics, like you'd see in people's cookies and browsing history. What is the supposed advantage here to focusing on one issue instead of all of them? Because to me, I see like decoupling intersectionalism into pieces only really enables the opportunity to kind of stab other issues of intersectionalism in the back for the sake of advancing your own cause. And this is like the big, like literal red flag I see creeping up in this online left space, and I'm worried we're going to get nosballs by 2024. So, like, what's a single issue that we think needs to be kind of taken out of like a general democratic advocacy intersectionalist group? Like, what is the issue we're talking about here?
So you asked. No, sorry, there's noise in the background, so if you hear something, I apologize. You asked, like, what is it other than being effective? Like, being effective, what's the other reason? What other reason would there need to be? Right, would be efficacy. Like, if this is an effective strategy, then that would be the reason, right, to move policy along, and that would be the reason. And I guess going back to like what we were talking about before, as to what are these issues, right? So there are many issues that the Democratic Party can be for, but that are not necessarily priorities, right? And that without a specific push, right? So like, imagine civil rights movement, right? Civil rights legislation, right? Moving through, right? If you're back then in the 1960s, right? And you wanted this pass, right? Then that would have been quite the focus, right? At that point, that would have been your focus, and you had advocacy groups pushing this thing. We weren't talking about necessarily guns or anything else, right? Or the environment. Right? We need to get this issue passed. Our voting rights, like, we have to get that passed. Well, that's an effective strategy, right? That focus, that laser focus there. And you can have a party that is ostensibly for it, but without that push, right? Without that groundswell, or the seemingly groundswell, then it won't get passed. And even then, well, actually, I'll leave that last part off. But does that make sense to you, Pixie, at all?
I guess I don't know. Like, I don't see any specific evidence that like here's something that will be better. But I mean, if you're into just one specific cause, like, we have those already. So I'm just, I don't know. I guess I'm confused. Like, what needs to change here?
Okay. Sorry, someone dropped out. I didn't see that.
Yeah, I think Femboy. I think
Okay,
Maya
Femboy.
left because they have because they normally have like really strict time they go with.
Okay. All right. Sure.
My turn now.
Sure. Go ahead.
Okay, so one thing I was gonna say for Femboy Maths, but also for Pixie, is that we still, again, we don't want to mix single issue voting versus single issue groups and advocation, right? Or advocacy, not advocation, advocacy. I think one of the good examples of this is the well, there. a lot of right-wing groups do this very, very effectively, and they're able to motivate their individuals and motivate voters really easily. And I think we do it to some degree on the more left side of the spectrum, but not as effectively. And one way in which that, like I've done it, at least here on the local level, I can't say so much on the national level, but I've like moved through a lot of different parties here in California. And usually I don't have a party preference, and I kind of pick a party based on a typical thing that I want to accomplish at the time and help support and motivate. And third parties are really good at that particular type of thing. Here in the US, it's actually historically what third parties are most effective at is focusing on a single issue and driving that until you can get it. And it's something that it's that's one approach to it. And so that's kind of where like left leaning politics manifests in single issue advocacy. The Green Party is an example of that, and the Peace and Freedom Party is another example of that. Um, I think that I'm not really coming up with any good ideas as to like where, like examples of where we do that in terms of nonprofits like 501c4s, kind of like the NRA, aside from maybe PETA. Like, but I don't know if PETA is a really good example of that kind of thing, because they're less political and more operate within the framework of existing law to focus on things. But it's kind of, they're in the left side of things. So maybe if we did actually start working on building up these nonprofits that go and talk to, with the NRA, it's a little bit different because they talk to corporations to get a lot of their funding as well. The majority of their funding, even though they've got a lot of people paying into the NRA, they're getting a lot of money coming in from the gun lobby overall and gun manufacturers. So what we would need to do is we would need to look at the issues that we want to focus on, say a specific issue, build a 501c4 out of that, and then find other sources of funding, that where there's enough funding, or motivate enough voters to put money into it to push the lobby, as well as drive the voting force, doing the advocacy, doing the canvassing, etc. All those different things, because they cost money. So that's what we kind of need to look at. The NRA is such a prime example of this because it's focusing on an issue where there's a big industry behind supporting that issue, right? There's a bunch of big companies whose they're depending on civilians buying their guns. So they're going to put a bunch of money into the NRA in order to get them to motivate people to vote against gun control, for instance, and loosening up laws. So that's where we need to look at. I think that would actually be is something we probably do need to look into. I think that there's not a lot of attention put into that, or someone could correct me. Maybe I'm just not thinking of any good examples off the top of my head.
Yeah. So, Pixie, what do you think of various recent movements and their effectiveness in terms of, like, let's say the fight for $15 an hour, like a living wage, $15 an hour, like that type of advocacy? Do you think that simply advocating for that, like, okay, taking that to a policymaker, saying that, like, well, we want this, but we also want a whole list of other things, right?
So really quick,
yeah,
Femboy
please.
Math wants to be added back to the VC.
Oh,
They said in the chat
okay.
that Wi-Fi was funky. Sorry.
Okay, no, oh no, thank you. I didn't see that. Thank you so much. All right, let's pull them back in, and that's great. Glad you could rejoin us, Maths. Okay, yeah. So, what do you think? What do you think of that advocacy? Do you think it's more effective to go to a lawmaker and say that, well, we want $15 an hour minimum wage only, right? And this is the thing, right? This is what needs to happen to get our votes, or that we have a total package, right? And it'd be great if we could get this passed, but we understand, of course, within the political system that some things won't make it, right? And so if this particular priority doesn't pass, well, it is what it is. Like, Pixie?
I mean, if you can show me data that separating out issues will help, then like great. But until then, there's already one group that's very effective at pushing literally every issue of equality I care about at once, and that's called the Democratic Party. So like, show me numbers and I'm on board.
Okay.
But until then,
All right.
I don't know.
Fair enough. Is anyone else? I'm not sure. Go ahead, Sonia.
Me? Okay. So I think in terms of maybe numbers aren't the thing to look at right now, but one thing probably to look at are various stalemates or lack of actual movement that we've had on various issues. For example, Medicare for all, right, would be one. There, we haven't had a lot of movement on that. There's a bit of an issue trying to get any progress on that. Another one would be raising the minimum wage. Could these things have perhaps had more movement if there was more of a cohesive effort to push them? Because we do suffer from a lot of division. I think one of the problems that we see with those of us who are more on the left side of the spectrum, we have a lot of conflict with each other. We're trying to focus on a lot of issues. We butt heads on a lot of things. If we could pull together, perhaps through some kind of organization that's really working hard to bring people together and show them how they can both benefit from, despite their differences, can benefit from something specific, could be motivated to move the needle on making progress on things like minimum wage and Medicare for all, UBI, etc., student loan debt forgiveness, it's all those kinds of things. Maybe that's a thing to look at more so, the stalemates and the conflicts in agreement on the left. Because we do know that historically people on the right tend to pull together more readily and all fall in line, when push comes to shove, and we're known for kind of being constantly divisive, right?
I would generally say so.
You can say, Maury.
Yeah. I was gonna say generally it seems like there's a big issue when it comes to just even fighting for how we want to implement things. When it comes to leftist policies. Like everybody's always like, oh well, Medicare for all, and then we look at polling data and it shows, well, like yeah, we all generally agree we need some sort of universal healthcare, some kind of variant of it. But then this polling, it seems to be very, very split depending on the poll, where it's either like some people want a public option, some people want Medicare for all, and then people just bundle all of the polls together and say, see, look, Medicare for all is like really, really popular. Or people come together and say, see, look, we need student loan forgiveness for everybody all over the board, when really it seems to be like the polling data seems to be like, well, we need like student loan forgiveness for people who are like at such an economic disadvantage that they really can't pay it back, because if somebody is like, Don Trump Jr., like we don't really expect that, his student loan should be forgived, if that makes sense. So it's like we need to really focus on the basics of what we need or want to be done in terms of leftist policies, and then try to go from there. Because when you have people yelling at Democrats for doing too little, but then, doing too much, then, it just becomes a hodgepodge, and it looks like nothing is in unison. Whereas the right seems to be, well, we're doing it this way, and we might disagree with it in private, and Mitt Romney might have a hissy fit in the back room, but at the end of the day, we're all going to sit out there and grin, even though we just ate a big old bucket of shit.
Sure. Uh, So I'll make it clear that my opinion on this is actually quite mixed. I don't know what the best path is, right? I'm just really exploring this with y'all, so understanding your points of view. Would single issue voting be better? I'm not quite sure, but I've heard arguments for it, and I think there's some convincing takes on it. But on the other side, I think you all have presented good arguments on the other side. So yeah, I wanted to just explore this topic. So I think we did that pretty thoroughly. Thanks so much.